When he moved to New York City in 1827, he had no opportunities and no money, like many migrants in the city. He worked on these very waters as a mariner, trying to make a living for himself, struggling to get by. But for a man with his simple job, why was his legacy historic? Because in a city where slavery was crucial to its prosperity, a black man was able to make a name for himself and build one of the most important movements in American history. This is the story of David Ruggles. David Ruggles was born in Norwich, Connecticut in 1810 to David Ruggles Sr., a blacksmith, and Nancy Ruggles, a founder of the Methodist Church in Norwich. Norwich provided Ruggles with an integrated childhood, since in Connecticut, slavery was gradually being abolished, and by the 1810s, only 8% of the black population in Norwich was enslaved.
Growing up, Ruggles played with white children, which was extremely contradictory to ideas of race interaction at the time. The idea was that white kids and black kids should be separated in all aspects of life, but in Norwich, at least in his experience, that was not the case. And most likely, he had a very different view of the world, at least America, than what it was really like. And experiences that contradicted his worldview would have shaped and fueled his abolitionism.
At 17, he moved to New York City and worked as a mariner for 2 years. The same year he moved to New York was the same year that Samuel Cornish and John Russwurm published the first issue of Freedom's Journal. The journal was created to amplify black voices on issues concerning them, since at the time, only white voices weighed in on issues of race. Although Ruggles was not an abolitionist when the journal was first published, he later became involved with abolitionist publications. The Emancipator, another publication, hired him to sell subscriptions starting in 1833.
In 1829, Ruggles opened a grocery store at 1 Cortlandt Street in New York. And that store was hated by many white people. The idea of a black man owning a store would have sent shivers down their spines, and the fact that he was successful was even worse.
Even though there was opposition, Ruggles expanded his grocery store into a bookstore in 1834, which, historically, was the first black-owned bookstore and sold anti-slavery publications. The store also provided those who were denied access to the New York Public Library with a place to read and learn. Around this time, Ruggles' writings began to be published in the publications his store sold. But the following year that he opened the bookstore, a mob of angry white people, fed up with the rising number of empowered black voices, stormed through New York City, terrorizing black people, both enslaved and free. In 1835, a mob of white people stormed through New York City, terrorizing black people.
David Ruggles was one of the many people that the mob targeted. They even burned his bookstore down. Now, he had been involved in the abolitionist movement before, but through his experience, that want, that need, that drive to be involved was amplified. And a few years later, he even opened his own magazine because of this, called the Mirror of Liberty.
The magazine, started in 1838, was similar to other abolitionist magazines of the time, amplifying the voices of many black people. It contained poems and other forms of writing to persuade and educate Americans on the evils of slavery.
Our Countrymen in Chains by John J. Whitter. Our fellow countrymen in chains, slaves in a land of light and law, slaves encroached on the very plains where rose the stories of freedom's war.
Reading in behalf of the Mirror of Liberty. Pursuant to notice, a large assemblage of ladies and gentlemen convened at the infant schoolroom on Wednesday coming, June 2nd, 1841. Benjamin Whedon was elected chairman, and William C. Nell appointed secretary.
Now, the burning down of his bookstore was not the only reason why David Ruggles was motivated to start his magazine. The other was an attempted kidnapping in December of 1836. Now, a few weeks prior to the kidnapping, he had been told there were rumors of a slave ship docked in New York Harbor. Now, he was beyond infuriated because that was illegal. He went onto the ship multiple times in daylight, and indeed was able to confirm that there were slaves on that ship.
Ruggles was able to have the captain arrested, but he was quickly released. The release infuriated black New Yorkers, but the notion the cop was even arrested angered many white people, including a New York police officer. The cop devised a plan for him and slave catchers to seek out and punish Ruggles for speaking out and attempting to stop the processes of slavery. The mob came to his house with weapons and threatened to kick down the door if he didn't let them in. Ruggles did not let them in. Instead, the mob went to obtain a warrant to enter, but once they got there, Ruggles had escaped.
Now, Ruggles later recalled that experience and noted very precisely that he was sure that if he had been captured, he would have been sold into slavery. Remember, at the time, many free black people were kidnapped by slave catchers and sold into slavery.
For the next few months, Ruggles would write mainly about free black people being sold into slavery and attempt to stop this terrible practice. He also founded the New York Committee of Vigilance, which was created to help those affected.
Now, if we mention David Ruggles, we must mention his avid role in the Underground Railroad. Between 1835 and 1838, Ruggles led 600 escaped slaves to freedom, one of them being Frederick Washington Bailey, or as we know now, Frederick Douglass.
But even men with amazing successes are merely mortal. In 1842, David Ruggles became incredibly sick and was nearly blind. Even though his doctor informed him he had only weeks to live, Ruggles began to recover under the practice of hydrotherapy. Hydrotherapy is a treatment which uses many forms of water, like baths and compresses, to cure disease. When he finally recovered after 18 months of hydrotherapy, he opened his own hydropathic practice. He treated many strange ailments and many important people, including fellow abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison. But sadly, in 1849, at the age of 39, David Ruggles died of inflamed bowels after an ocular disease caused him to be bedridden.
Now, even though he died much earlier than he should have, his legacy is beyond extraordinary. To own a grocery store, a bookstore, a magazine, a hydropathic practice is incredible, but to do it as a black man in antebellum America, in a city where slavery was economically essential, while speaking out against it, is beyond incredible. To do it all for the age of 40 is a feat not many can beat.
Dr. James. Don't get him, James. That's right. That's right. Talk to him, James. Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. Gus T. Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the global system of white supremacy. Today's date, I think, depending, I guess, on where you are, but I believe is the first official day of spring, if that means anything to anyone at all. It doesn't have to. We are picking up, this is our 5th installment on Dr. Colin Anthony Beckles' Pan-African Sites of Resistance, Black Bookstores, and the Struggle to Represent Black Identity. We should be picking up right at the beginning of Chapter 7. Now, we moved back to the U.S. Last week we kind of finished up with our British study of white supremacy, racism, moved back across the pond. Spent a lot of last week, once we got back to the U.S., talking about Louis Michaux and his efforts. I did want to make sure I got the correction in, because I meant to say it last week. We even had an attentive listener who wrote in last week to also call our attention to it, that Louis Michaux, although very important, super constructive, he is not credited with starting the first black bookstore in the U.S. The person credited with starting the first black bookstore in the U.S., as we learned in Char Adams, is David Ruggles. And that was why we started off this week with audio on Mr. Ruggles, who started his bookstore in New York in 1834. I thought that was important just to get that correction in. Maybe they didn't have as much information available on David Ruggles way back in the 90s when Dr. Beckles was doing his research, but just to include that, even just to make sure we were paying attention when we read Char Adams Black-Owned, yes, because David Ruggles is at the very beginning of that book. And I think that's so important. Even 200 years ago, black people attempting to provide a space where black people can think, study, read about racism, white supremacy, write books about racism, white supremacy, learn about white supremacy, racism, that angers racists. They burn down his establishment. Just keep that in mind as we continue to read. Even, in fact, when they talked about Mr. Ruggles fearing that he would be stolen and sold down south, we did read Solomon Northup, 12 Years a Slave. So we do know a little something about that here at the Katherine Massey Book Club. Much too important to be forgotten, as well as his work with the so-called Underground Railroad and trying to get some black people to safety away from the plantation. Like, wow, really important figure, Mr. Ruggles. Now that we corrected that omission from last week, we will push off to Chapter 7, Dr. Colin Anthony Beckles, Pan-African Sites of Resistance, the Context of White Supremacy. James Brown, say it loud, he say. We will get to it. Katherine Massey Book Club, audio segment number 1.
Chapter 7, The Black Power Movement, 1960s and 1970s. During the late 1960s, Joyce notes that the third surge in black publishing activity arrived when anti-racist movements again began to swell. The Civil Rights Movement, the Black Power Movement, and the Black Studies movements occurred in combination with other structural forces. Joyce lists these forces as follows. A. The literacy rate of blacks was greater than 95%. B. 81% of all blacks were living in urban areas. C. There was a spiraling increase in the number of black students attending institutions of higher learning. 287,000 enrolled in 1968 and 357,000 in 1970. D. Blacks employed in professional pursuits increased from 64,245 in 1910 to 611,924 in 1969. An increased awareness of their present and past cultures was flourishing in blacks. F. The greater investment in education and libraries by the federal government as evidenced by the National Defense Act of 1958, the Library Services Act of 1956, the Library Services and Construction Act of 1963, and the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. The result of the combination of these forces was a significant growth in the demand for books, magazines, and newspapers that treated black history and culture objectively. An executive at the book division of the Johnson Publishing Company recalls that when they announced the creation of this division, they received avalanches of letters from students, teachers, librarians, and from individuals wanting information that was not available in books at the time. Joyce, 1983. Given this demand, we again see a new proliferation of black publishing institutions and cultural organizations with publishing programs producing black books, magazines, articles, and newspapers. The combination of public demand and the availability of this information via the publishers led to a surge in the number of black bookstores across the United States. Increasingly, black bookstores began to appear up and down the East Coast, in Detroit and Chicago, in the Midwest, and out west in California. Government forces such as the Johnson administration passage of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the ESEA, were of particular significance for this surge. This was because the ESEA effused federal funds to secondary schools with a high concentration of low-income and minority residents. Black bookstores could directly benefit from this outpouring of funds because the act led to the establishment of a constant institutional market for their books. Black elementary and secondary schools, libraries in particular, Black studies departments, and university courses in general. However, only a few of these bookstores could be termed Pan-African sites of resistance. Rare was the Black bookstore that was established to fill the political agendas of the civil rights and Black power movements. Most were established solely for economic opportunity. Below, I present case histories of two such stores. One is of national and international significance, Drum and Spear Bookshop, Cress, and one store which held local significance, the Afro-Asian Bookshop. Additional Black bookstores involved in the network of Pan-African sites of resistance developed during this time period are also briefly presented. Drum and Spear, Washington, D.C. Drum and Spear was a thriving bookstore as well as a book publishing enterprise located in the heart of U.S. government, Washington, D.C. One of the nation's most powerful Pan-African sites of resistance opened its doors for business in June of 1968 while the smell of tear gas still lingered from the D.C. rebellions. Richardson and Joyce, 1983. Objectives. According to Judy Richardson, Executive Director, and Daphne Muse, Store Manager, the leadership of Drum and Spear was composed of former Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, organizers. Thus, the store's foremost objectives were similar to those of the SNCC organizations, reflecting the overall agendas of SNCC leaders Stokely Carmichael and H. Rap Brown. Why they started the store was the same sense that we started with SNCC. The freedom schools, which was that you had to, it was part of the politicization process. People had to have an underpinning of information in order to know the best way to move. Richardson, 794. Accordingly, the best way to do this was by developing Black institutions such as Black bookstores. With the book materials as their basis, the bookstores aimed to decolonize the minds of the Black community by presenting the Black community with a new, revolutionary definition of Black identity. That's what these bookstores were about. They were revolutionizing the Black mind. They were opening it up in a way then that anything was possible. That's what was so frightening. Richardson, 894. Another goal was to specifically target Black children. Thus, the store heavily stocked and published children's material. Along with the development of a rich selection of third world children's books, we also sponsored a citywide art contest and held readings specifically focusing on children's authors such as Eloise Greenfield. Muse, 794. Philosophically, their struggle was oriented around race and class. Moreover, while their notion of Black identity was Pan-African, it was expanded to include all people of color. Richardson explains, the store philosophy wasn't a narrow nationalism. We were very much about building our communities, but we also saw other third world people of color communities as being important to what we were doing. Richardson, 894. Finally, Drum and Spear's goal was not to simply stimulate academic discussion about the plight of Black community. The staff's objectives were on mobilization. Richardson comments, because you can get these folks talking politics and they don't do diddly. So our sense was that this was towards some sort of action. Richardson, 894. Below, we will see how this organizing dimension was prominent. Funding. Drum and Spear was originally funded with startup capital loaned by the United Church of Christ, the reverend of which was the father of the store leader, Charlie Cobb. More importantly, the store was opened when potential book buyers were receiving funds from the government. As noted above, the Johnson administration was responsible for the release of ESEA funds. Richardson comments on how this affected their store. There was all this money that was available for libraries and schools to have black and brown faces in these school books, and the trade books were coming out for kids in a way that they had not come out before. So you suddenly saw all these black and Latino stuff in books. So what happened was that we were able to supply a lot of them. Richardson, 894. Drum and Spear also qualified for a loan under this act and took a federal loan midway through its existence. Structure, physical makeup, and text. Drum and Spear was originally located on 14th Street in Southeast D.C., in the heart of D.C.'s impoverished black community. As such, they were just around the corner from Howard University, historically a predominantly conservative black university. As a bookstore and press, it was a large store. To give an idea of the amount of stock carried, it is reported that the book catalog itself was the width of the autobiography of Malcolm X. Richardson, 894. The textual material sold and published from the store covered all corners of the African diaspora and the Third World. Moreover, it carried much of the left-wing socialist literature, such as Red Book and pamphlets authored by Chairman Mao. Joyce lists some of the texts published by Drum and Spear and comments on the political structure and global vision of the institution. The first title released by Drum and Spear was an appropriate embodiment of its raison d'etre, a revised edition of historian C.L.R. James' classic A History of Pan-African Revolt, 1969, a historical analysis of black revolts from 1793, Santo Domingo, to 1969, Curacao. Other titles published by this firm seem to have fulfilled the need for cultural survival within the black community, such as The Book of African Names by Chief Ofuntoki, 1970, Speaking Swahili, Kusima Kiswahili by Bernard K. Manganda, 1971, African Heritage Series and Children of Africa, a Coloring Book, 1971, Enemy of the Sun, Poems of Palestinian Resistance, edited by Nasir Aru and Edmund Garid, 1970, in Poets of Liberation series, Joyce, 1986. Microstructure. In order to fulfill their objectives, Drum and Spear Bookstore Press was structured as a formal community resource center, providing free classes, a preschool, and a free clinic. Again, as Richardson points out, these were the same philosophical and political strategies followed by SNCC. Moreover, this was the same strategy utilized by the Black Panthers regarding the purpose of information centers and free breakfast programs they established, which was the way the movement had traditionally organized, that you brought people in through services. So you always had community centers, you always had lawyers' facilities, you always had freedom schools, and along with that, you always had a certain politic too. You didn't beat people over the head with it. You brought people what they needed most first, which was some of this other stuff, But for the Panthers, as well as for us, there was also the sense that parents are much more likely to hear you if they think you have their welfare at heart, and certainly the heart of their welfare is their kids. Richardson, 894. Apparently, the strategy was quite effective. Below, Muse and Richardson describe how the store functioned as a gathering place for the entire gamut of the black community, families to drug pushers, students to politicians, children to activists. Gwendolyn Brooke, June Jordan, Lerone Bennett, Shirley Graham Dubois, Leslie Lacey, Vertime Grosvenor, Hakai Madhubuti, Don Lee, and Sonia Sanchez conducted memorable readings and signings in the store. Everyone from Spati Odati, one of the local savvy street people, to the Tanzanian ambassador to the U.S. frequented the store. On any day, it would not be uncommon to see Sterling Brown, Gene Wiley, Francis Cress Welsing, Stokely Carmichael, or Toni Morrison, and children come in by the scores. We had an excellent relationship with some of the local merchants and the community. Under the leadership of Cobb, Cox, Featherstone, and Richardson, Drummond Spare definitely played a critical leadership role in the Pan-African and Black Power movements of the late 60s and early 70s. Muse, 894. We had purposely chosen the locations because we wanted to be in the community, and what we got was not just the students who were independent enough to come, even though they'd been warned against us, and certainly some of the more politically independent folk who were in the middle class of Washington. But we also started getting people who were just regular folk from that area, some of whom were pushing, some of whom were alcoholics, some of whom were addicts. Richardson, 894. From the above description, it is evident that the store was a community center. It became a vital link for not only the local D.C. black community, but the national and international literacy and political community as well. Teaching dimension. It stands to reason that the primary topics of discussion in the store would center around black politics, given the fact that the store sold and published counter-hegemonic texts. The recurrence of this type of socio-physical structure facilitated the store's development into a foundation of political thinking. Richardson, 894. Within the political wellspring, many of the local community patrons would get their first taste of radical black discourse by listening to the discussions and debates carried out daily in the store. It wasn't a dead store where you went in like Bretino's or something. There was a lot of different kinds of people in the store when you walked in, and a lot of them were having conversations. Richardson, 894. Moreover, patrons were routinely guided along their political education process by staff members. In this informal teaching setting, as the patrons' level of political sophistication increased, the staff or the books themselves would advise the patrons as to which books to read next. What was amazing was that you could see folks readily change. You could see guys who were unemployed and who at that point had maybe 5th, 6th grade education, who had probably been through some kind of jail, who would start out with some of the lighter reading. And what would happen is that they would come in and get that stuff, or they would come in and get the autobiography of Malcolm X, because that was really hot then, and they would get that because it was so readable. And what you will find is that they would graduate from some of the pulp stuff to, you could track them. You could track individual people who would come and buy the silly stuff, and then go from that into some really serious stuff, which I suspect was also in its own way a danger for people who didn't want these kind of folks reading this kind of stuff. Interviewer. Right, so they would graduate from light reading to heavy reading? Richardson. And to more political reading. Richardson, 894. Information Center. The store was a natural place for local political groups to advertise their events because of the type of patrons drawn to the store. The bookshop thus became a vital information center vis-a-vis the political activities occurring locally, nationally, and internationally. Below, Richardson discusses how this informal process of political information exchange constituted the store's daily activity. Interviewer: was there active recruiting in the store by local groups? Richardson: not really, except through the leaflets, and anybody could leaf, as long as we didn't think they were antithetical to what we felt was the process of the community. Then people could leave their stuff. You had a lot of discussion. You'd have people coming in the store talking to people, talking about the books, and it was really a very live, exciting bookstore. It wasn't a dead store where you went in like Britanno's or something. There were a lot of different kinds of people in the store, and a lot of them were having conversations. So if you wanted to get the word out, yeah, you would come in the bookstore and say, you know, we're having a demonstration, so if you could tell people about it, we'd appreciate it. And I suspect, yeah, we did that not because we were necessarily the organizers, but if we felt it was important, we would make sure they saw the leaflets or make sure that they knew about a meeting or whatever. Richardson, 894. Organizing dimension. Informal. Demonstrations and rallies. Drawing on their SNCC experience from the early civil rights movement, Drum and Spear Bookshop members organized the first African Liberation Day in Washington, D.C. in 1970. Other demonstrations and rallies were organized by shop members to enlighten the black community about a variety of political issues. The armed struggle occurring in southern Africa, U.S. involvement in Chile, the anti-colonial struggles in Guyana, and the anti-Vietnam War protests. We certainly publicized any demonstrations, certainly in the 1970s when you had the first African Liberation Day. You definitely had stuff about that. You had anything that had to do with the community. We said we were in it but not of it. We saw ourselves as Africans in America at that time, and so a lot of what we were doing was publicizing some of the armed struggle that was going on in southern Africa. And anything that was black and progressive was something that we would publicize. We certainly were involved. I remember a demonstration I was in when someone was killed in Chile, and that was a major march. I did it for myself. It's difficult because at that point I don't remember Charlie Cobb or Cortland Cox as being people as part of the demonstration. What they were part of was the organizing for certain kinds of things. Richardson, 894. Organizing dimension, formal, institution building. But the base of it was not the demonstrations. It was the institutions, which was at least as dangerous to what we considered to be the power structure as books. Richardson, 894. In addition to the organization and participation in the demonstrations, and perhaps more significantly, Drum and Spear leadership were involved in organizing a network of black-controlled institutions across the Washington, D.C. area. As I listened to Richardson describe the process, it is evident that in addition to the bookstore and press, institution building became their raison d'etre. We saw what we were doing as institution building. It wasn't just that we had a bookstore, that what we needed was a black-controlled institution within the black community. And so that was Drum and Spear Bookstores. That was Drum and Spear Press. That was the Center for Black Education. That was the cultural institution down the street. Richardson, 894. Interviewer: were you in control of the Center of Black Education? Richardson: I wasn't, but certainly Cortland Cox and Charlie Cobb were founding members of the center, and so that kind of overlapping directorship certainly occurred. So it was all these things that we felt was not just organizations that were to a demonstration. They were to be institutions on which we as a community could build. Richardson, 894. Richardson continues describing how the microstructure of the bookstore was supplemented via the connection with the Center for Black Education and the impact it had on the local black community. Interviewer: were there formal lectures in addition to the informal debates? Richardson: at the center you would get that. So we didn't have to do that kind of lecture because most of what was done was at the center, and the center was a clinic. It was a free clinic. We had doctors who came from Howard University Hospital. As a matter of fact, there were 2 women who started out at Howard and were working at the clinic because part of the thing was that they were going to go back to Africa with this knowledge. So a lot of people were trained in medical services. Well, what happened was that a lot of them went through medical school and became doctors. At least 2 or 3 of the women who came through that did that. A couple of people became attorneys because we had law classes. Richardson, 894. Armed with the bookstore and press, the cultural center, the Black Education Center, and a short-lived satellite store, Drummond Spear had organized a formal local web of Pan-African resistance within the nation's capital city. However, the sphere of influence did not stop there. Indeed, it extended across the nation. National networks. Drummond Spear became the principal organizer of radical black preschools in the D.C. area, equipped with their arsenal of vital black material and assisted by network affiliates. Moreover, Drummond Spear became the primary distributor for numerous renowned black preschools and Black Studies programs which were emerging nationally at top universities. Richardson. So, for example, out of the Center for Black Education, you had an organization that did freedom schools similar to the ones that we had done in Mississippi, but they were black preschools and some of those still live. Interviewer. Okay, so it was mainly the institution, if not just the books and the distribution of that knowledge and things of that nature. Richardson. I'd say it was about equal. Certainly by that time, we had become the largest black bookstore in the country. We were supplying a lot of black studies departments. For example, Dr. James Turner up at Cornell would buy his books from us. Stanford would buy them. UC Berkeley, a lot of the black studies had begun to buy books from us, and a lot of preschools. We had one of the largest children's departments. So, there were things that we were doing around political education that was important, but we saw it as part of institution building. Richardson, 894. In addition, Drummond Spear had direct organizational links to black-controlled universities nationally and organized similar institutions on the African continent itself. As we see below, the sign, Africans Home and Abroad, draped inside the bookstore wall, truly reflected the philosophy and scope of Drummond Spear. For example, Cobb was going down to Malcolm X University in Greensboro, and there was a lot of going back and forth between Owusu Okoye, who was then head of Malcolm X University in Greensboro. It was almost seen as a satellite, or us as a satellite of them, as part of the same part of access between Drummond Spear and Center for Black Education and Malcolm X University in Greensboro. And all that having to do with a lot of this whole thing of Africans at home and abroad. African diaspora. And what we were trying to build was a sense of solidarity. And so when Owusu came back from Zimbabwe, there was a real coalition. We were a think tank for a lot of the stuff that was going on around that anti-colonial struggle in Africa. Richardson, 894. Furthermore, their unique stock and their focus on children's material allowed Drum and Spear to become the primary suppliers for other black bookstores who were just in the beginning stages. These black bookstores were located across the United States. Interviewer: what about local, national, or international bookstores? Richardson: oh yeah, we would always call, for example, we knew all the other black bookstores in the country. We knew Third World because Dudley Randall had something in Detroit. We knew Marcus Books in San Francisco, Oakland. We certainly knew Liberation in Harlem. We knew all the bookstores. Why? Because we would get the African Writers series. So they would run out, for example, and we became the distributor for some of that stuff. So we were supplying the other bookstores as well. And certainly when we started the press, we were selling to all the black bookstores. We had the Palestinian poetry book. We had the Children of Africa coloring book. We had a lot of stuff. We had C.L.R. James, History of Pan-African Result, out of the press. Richardson, 894. Interviewer: what about international connections with Bogle and New Beacon, London, England bookshops? Richardson: we got stuff from them, but I don't know if we sold to them. Interviewer: was there any communication going on between them? Would you hear from people who had been there? Richardson: now that we would hear, and people who would come in from other parts of the world who would say that X person told them that they had to visit the store. I can't remember specific people. But we would get a lot of Africans who would come in from Ghana, from Tanzania. You would certainly get the Black Brit. I remember there were times people would come through and say, we really want to start something like this in our country, but I don't remember who they were. The other part of it was that some of our folks had been other places. Cortland had been in Vietnam. A lot of our folks had been internationally connected. So when they started the store, some of those connections came in. Richardson, 894. In light of Drum and Spear's activity, it must also be mentioned that Drum and Spear was not isolated in their struggle. Some of the black bookstores they distributed to also functioned as Pan-African sites of resistance for their respective black communities. We now briefly examine the characteristics of others in the Black Bookstore Network. The Black Bookstore Network. The Black Bookstore Network was composed of 6 major stores which functioned as Pan-African sites of resistance or alternative sites of resistance and possessed national significance. There were Drum and Spear in Washington, D.C., Michaux and Liberation in New York, Hakim's Books in Philadelphia, and Aquarian and Marcus Books in California. Since Drum and Spear and Michaux have been previously reviewed, below I briefly examine Liberation and highlight certain characteristics of the remaining major bookstores. Additionally, I present 2 black bookstores which functioned as Pan-African sites of resistance for their local communities, Baltimore's The Black Book and Buffalo's Afro-Asian Bookstore. These locally significant stores are compared with the more nationally renowned stores with respect to objectives and structure. Finally, the international connection held by the major stores are reviewed. Liberation Books, Harlem, New York. Michaux and Richard B. Moore's bookshops were the predominant bookstores in the Harlem area until the mid-1960s. However, near the end of the decade, as both Michaux and Moore's were advancing in age, a vibrant new bookstore was born, which would eventually supersede their influence. Taking inspiration from her father, a captain in Marcus Garvey's Black Star Line, Una Mulzik left her publishing job at Random House in 1963 and set up a bookstore in Guyana for Chedi Jagan. Guyana's opposition party leader. According to Michaux, in 1964, a bomb sent by CIA forces supporting Majority Party leader Forbes Burnham went off in the bookstore, killing her assistant and destroying the shop. However, the community rebuilt the bookshop in 6 weeks and renamed the shop after the assistant in his honor, the Michael Ford Bookshop, Michaux 794. Una Michaux returned to the U.S. shortly thereafter and opened her Liberation Bookstore in Harlem in 1967. She opened on the anniversary of Malcolm X's death in the same area of Harlem where Young's Book Exchange once stood. With Malcolm X posters plastered on the store walls and his speeches blaring over the loudspeaker, one of the Black liberation struggle's most vital sites of resistance was born. Objectives and store material. The dawn of Liberation Bookstore came during the height of Black liberation movement. Michaux's main motivation was simple: liberate the minds of the Black community, inform the community about the enemy and its activities at home and abroad. Sister Una, as she is referred to, had a background in Garveyism and Caribbean socialism. Thus, her garrison was replete with books from J.A. Rogers to George James's Stolen Legacy. Like Drum and Spear, Liberation also stocked the writings of Lenin, Marx, and Chairman Mao. Of note is the fact that Michaux was still operating at the time of Liberation. However, according to Sister Una, some differences were noted when comparisons were made between Liberation and Michaux's bookstore. First, Michaux's focused primarily on the U.S., while Liberation had a much more Pan-African focus. Secondly, while Michaux's had a tradition of Garveyite nationalism, Liberation Bookstore was a perfect site for blacks looking for a class-based answer to the race problem. A black Marxist perspective, if you will. In relation to Michaux's bookstore, then Liberation Bookstore could be termed as an alternative site of black resistance. Network and microstructure. Liberation Bookstore drew store patrons from the local community. Debate about the relative merits of Black power, Pan-Africanism, Caribbean socialism, and African socialism was a constant occurrence at Liberation, given the broad section of customers residing in this area of Harlem. Primary support for Liberation came from the students and faculty of fledgling Black Studies programs from the surrounding universities. Professors placed large orders for their particular classes. Students from nearby City University of New York would also be required to visit the bookstore and to talk with Sister Una. Many of the store's local contacts came from bookselling in the field, with Sister Una delivering books to the various political activists meeting, university lectures, and various programs held in the area. Other contacts came from the prison system. The store received hundreds of requests from prisons. The local networking which occurred between black bookstores such as Liberation, Michaux, and Richard Moore's cannot be understated. The relationship and connection the bookstores held with Harlem's community were equally meaningful. Richard Moore of the Frederick Douglass Book Center comments on the situation. A network of African-based information was growing in Harlem. In homes, more books on African life and development are seen and read. This concurs with the increasing sale of African literature in Harlem bookshops. Among fraternal societies and clubs, in church and school, library and lecture halls, more programs than ever before are being presented on various aspects of African life and liberation. Moore and Clark, 1968. organizing dimension. The store was also patronized by local political activists, drawn by Liberation's textual human information base and the potential party recruits. Black Panthers, such as Assata Shakur, frequented the store. Furthermore, many anti-war activists came into the store to buy or discuss the pamphlets by Chairman Mao. As a result, the bookstore became a central distribution site for the local political organizations surrounding the Black Power movement. Day after day, leaflets prominently displayed in the window, on counters, or on shelves would communicate approaching demonstrations, rallies, study groups, lectures, and or the opening of new shelters. Additionally, because of the ties with the Black Panthers and other local political organizations, Miss Mulzax performed an informal organizing role by directing people to their sponsored events, such as the Panthers' local community information centers, where they offered information on free housing, free food, and free legal advice. Moreover, Sister Una was also directly involved in community activism, holding liberation-sponsored demonstrations and participating in local political organization demonstrations. Hakeem's Bookshop, Philadelphia, PA. The major black bookstores in the Philadelphia area was Hakeem's Books. Hakeem had been a bookseller on the streets of Philadelphia since 1956 and opened a store in 1961. A former Nation of Islam member and accountant for the city, he was greatly influenced by the writings of J.A. Rogers and also maintained contacts with Michaux' bookstore. The impetus for starting his own store was A. Black people should know their history, and B. White stores did not carry Rogers' books. Hakeem, 794. Aquarian Bookstore, Los Angeles, California. Out west in Los Angeles, Aquarian Bookstore was the major black bookstore of Southern California. Owned and operated by Dr. and Mrs. Alfred Ligon, the Aquarian has served as a bookstore, African spirituality center, and meeting place since the 1940s. After the 1960s Watts Rebellion, the public demand for black books rose dramatically. Accordingly, Aquarian's material shifted to much of the political black literature that was being demanded. Aquarian's core texts reflected the political and spiritual underpinnings Ligon believed was necessary for the black community to genuinely understand its true identity, its historic notion of self. Books by authors such as J.A. Rogers and Chancellor Williams were crucial. I think we found that within the structure of J.A. Rogers' approach that he did give us insight into a great interest in terms of the basic idea of what blacks had contributed to civilization. Then, later on, we began to read the works of Dr. James, Stolen Legacy, which defined that it wasn't the Greeks that gave mankind their philosophy, but it was the Africans that brought forth what we define as the philosophical ideas that were accepted by Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, and various others. They came out of the African mystery system. That's the background in which we now operate, and began basically to understand more and more the emphasis to the whole philosophical field, what we refer to as religion and history. Ligon and Hopkins, 1984. As such, Aquarium was drawing not only those interested in African spirituality, but local community members and black political groups. Ron Karenga's United Slaves Organization and protest artist Frank Green both used the store to present their works or hold meetings during the 1960s. The Black Book, Baltimore, Maryland. Smaller stores also functioned as sites of resistance for the local black communities in Buffalo, New York, and Baltimore, Maryland. In Baltimore, Paul Coates operated the Black Bookstore. Coates, a former regional director for the Black Panther Party, described himself as a product of the Black Liberation Movement. After leaving the Panthers in 1972, Coates realized that there were no institutions in the black community where black folks could obtain much-needed information. He reports that information centers such as the Black Church and the Black Barbershop were not able to function as consistent, formal structures of information. What Baltimore's black community needed was a formal institution that focused primarily on providing the necessary information to survive the oppressive forces of U.S. society. The Black Book was established with the goal of fulfilling that objective. Organizing dimension. Coates also wanted to develop an operation which would deliver books to members of the black community in prisons. Coates believed that it was necessary to educate prisoners for their return to the community. Always concerned with the relationship between blacks and the prison system, Coates also organized the George Jackson prison movement from the bookshop. Additionally, depending upon their specific need, Coates referred patrons to other black bookstores or the Panthers' information centers, nationwide centers which provided information about housing, the law, and food availability. The Afro-Asian Bookstore, Buffalo, New York. Martin Sostre, a native of Puerto Rico, operated the Afro-Asian Bookstore in Buffalo, New York. As with Coates, his bookstore was not located in an internationally known city. His was a small black bookstore located in the poor black section of everyday Buffalo. Objectives. In his Letter to My Revolutionary Friends, we can listen to Sostre describe the objectives of his store. The purpose of my bookshop from its humble origins 2 years ago, when all I had was 40 books on my shelves and 5 empty racks which I made, was twofold. 1, to provide to the Afro community, which was without a bookshop, with our first bookshop where books about our history, culture, and the writings of all our black freedom fighters and thinkers could be purchased. And 2, to make available to the black and white communities, in addition to the aforesaid books, the so-called controversial or leftist literature, the voice of protest and dissent, the other side of the story. Sostre and Copeland, 1970. Microstructure. Text and informal teaching. As Sostre continues, he describes the bookshop interaction, its multiple dimensions. Because of the striking similarity that exists within the social interaction structure of Sostre's small store and that of the larger black bookstores, Sostre's description of this interaction is given full notation.
I'm reminded of being a young guy, a teenager, and I was fascinated with books, but I couldn't afford many of them because they were so expensive. So I would go into Robin's Bookstore in Center City, and I would walk in there and read to my heart's content. I really didn't have intention to buy many books. And again, I couldn't afford them. But I remember picking up a book called The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, a strange name like that. And I turned it around, and it talked about the book being considered, it was either the handbook of the Black Revolution or the Bible of the Black Revolution. I'm not sure which, but having read that on the back cover, I was in. I was sold. I mean, this is a book not only that I was required to read as a young member of the Black Panther Party, but I wanted to read it, and I wanted to devour it. If I could have eaten it, I would have done it. It was a wonderful and thrilling experience. And that was its first English translation. I think that its second translation leaves something to be desired. I think both translations are difficult to really capture the remarkable brilliance of a guy like Frantz Fanon. But the first edition, because that's the one that really rings in memory and in mind, had a bit of beauty in it and a bit of poetry in it that does not survive to the present. But we remember, reading when you're a teenager will ring in your brain as long as you live. With love, not fear, this is Mumia Abu Jamal.
Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. Ring in your brain is a metaphor. That was Mumia. It's a little different from the things that you read as a teen will influence your thought, speech, actions, feelings, emotions for the rest of your life. That's something to think about. And even, I guess, hey, if you don't do any reading, well, then maybe you miss out on having some of those early lessons and things that can shape, mold, influence your thinking from a young age. But there you go, Mumia Abu Jamal. And we read Wretched of the Earth, Katherine Massey Book Club, in the archives. Reading more important than watching television. What rings in my mind is, at the time, that was the worst book I've ever read. I don't know if we had to go back to check to see if we read the first edition, second edition. That's a cowbell too. That might even be something to monitor as we kind of roll through here. I'll say something about that later, but yeah. Anyway, in the archives, talk about that later. Reading more important than watching television, and that was from this week. Mumia talking about being young and not even able to afford too many books. You would go to the bookstore in Philadelphia, which we talked about this week, and in Char Adams Black-Owned. But just being able to go and sit and read and get this whole list, and I guess they nabbed him saying that's the Black Bible. We'll see if they use similar jargon in this book, Bible. I know Fanon has mentioned, but we'll just see if they call it the Bible. Anyway, the number 720-716-7300, the code 564-943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Number again, 720-716-7300, the code 564-943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The email untiljustice@gmail.com. I said last week I got discombobulated. We had a listener who tipped us off, let us know, wait a minute, we did read that. Louis Michaux did not start the first bookstore, and I had highlighted that as well. Like, man, I know we heard about David Ruggles. Like, what's going on here? Anyway, I neglected to read our listeners' notes, picking us up from last week, so going back to make sure we are not leaving things out. Let's see. This is going backwards to right at the end of chapter 6. I think I messed up from right there. Let's see. Yep, because I didn't get the Arthur Michaux. So chapter 6. 1. I began by reviewing the history of one such institution, the first major black bookstore in the U.S., Michaux National Memorial African Bookstore. No mention of David Ruggles. Maybe his bookstore was not major, but I think he deserves at least a mention. This emphasizes the importance of reading multiple sources, which is a hallmark of the C.O.W.S. If you have the time, energy can be helpful. 2. Charles Blockson, a black bibliophile, comments on Michaux's role as community oral historian. What Mr. Michaux gave me was more than encouragement. His contact with an era which preceded my own, having been conversant with landmark writers before I was born, provided me with personal insight and direction as to the course of literature during and after the Harlem Renaissance. Charles Blockson, age 89, he founded one of the largest and most prestigious collections of African American artifacts. It was his life's work. He started his collection at age 9. Wow. Donated it to Temple University in 1984 when it contained 20,000 artifacts, books, first editions, rare documents, and various other artifacts. It is open to the public. See Charles L. Blockson collection at Temple turns 40. Wow. 3. When I saw J.A. Rogers down at the Student Center at NYU in 1959, his level of discussion about his books, sex and race, and nature knows no color line was a basic theoretical refutation of biogenetic determinism. J.A. Rogers, black male, was a prolific author, journalist, and historian who made numerous contributions to the history of Africa and the diaspora. He died in 1966. He wrote a lot about the accomplishments of black people in an attempt to refute concepts of race inferiority. Some of his other interesting titles, from Superman to Man, the 5 Negro presidents, the FBI apparently took an interest in him. Any black person, really. Local networks of resistance, institutions, book clubs, bookstores. 1. Michaux networked locally with other black cultural organizations. Black Literary Society of particular significance was the Blyden Society of Harlem. It existed from 1935 to 1940. The Blyden Society was originally called the Harlem History Club. The founder, Willis Nathaniel Huggins, was the first African American to earn a Ph.D. from Fordham University. Dr. Huggins' coat was found on the George Washington Bridge, and his death was ruled a suicide. However, many people in Harlem thought he was murdered. Seems likely. Local bookstore network. 1. The first Afro-American bookstore, George Young's Book Exchange, was established in 1921. Harlem on 135th and Lenox. I don't think this is accurate. Isn't David Ruggles' store the first? Yes. 2. Richard B. Moore's shop, the Frederick Douglass Book Center, located at 125th Street, east of 7th Avenue. As opposed to Michaux's, the trend in Frederick Douglass's book center has been away from the general fiction and toward the history and culture of people and African origins. I don't think this store was mentioned in the previous text. I have to go back and mention. The name doesn't immediately leap out at me, so that might be true. Chapter 6, Conclusions. Louis H. Michaux's bookstores. Via the text and the microstructure, store patrons became armed with black counter-hegemonic discourse, textual, oral, and visual discourse on black identity, which countered the racist notions of black and African identity. The current text and the previous one, Black-Owned, emphasize the impact that Mr. Michaux's force of personality contributed to the success of his bookstores. The current text describes him as a griot, traveling poet, musician, storyteller, who maintains a tradition of oral history in parts of West Africa. The photograph of Mr. Michaux in the previous text was beneficial and served to illustrate his flamboyance. Moreover, all the pictures in the previous text were a great addition. I guess that's one, or I would say, this being a dissertation, that being a book, often that is a difference. Dissertations generally, they do not have pictures. Now they might have images or what have you, but generally, as someone who's read more than 5 dissertations, they generally don't have a pause and let's look at some pictures of the people. that is one massive difference from a dissertation to a book. Another one, access. I think I might have mentioned that last week. Books, obviously, a lot of times they're advertised, and you'll see book reviews and the New York Times and all of that. Dissertations generally are not. And it's not just that they're not advertised. They are generally, it's access. Books, you would hear them advertised and people talking about them and authors doing interviews and such. Dissertations, generally, that is not the case. They are intended for a very small audience of people, the folks that are going to be doing the defense and all that of this project to see if you're qualified, but it's generally not something that's intended for the greater public. So there are some significant differences between a book and a dissertation. Graphics, images, that would be one, even though there are some graphics in this book, but not pictures per se. Let's see, chapter 7. The Black Power Movement. So I've caught us up to today. Literacy rates of blacks was greater than 95%. 81% of all blacks were living in urban areas. Black students attending institutions of higher learning, 287,000 enrolled in 1968, 357,000 in 1970. Blacks employed in professional pursuits increased from 64,000 in 1910 to 611,924 in 1969. An executive at the book division of the Johnson Publishing Company recalls that when they announced the creation of this division, they received avalanches of letters from students, teachers, and librarians. A lot of black people were engaged in constructive activities during this time period. Yes, not all, but lots. That's probably why white people had to go to work. We do not want to see constructive black people. Bring on the mad dog and the drugs. Drum and Spear, Washington, D.C. 1. That's what these bookstores were about. They were revolutionizing the black mind. Maybe a clearer way of expressing this would be deconditioning the black mind. My conditioning is conditioned. Facts. 2. Funding Drum and Spear was originally funded with startup capital loaned by the United Church of Christ's, the reverend of which was the father of store leader Charlie Cobb, was open when potential book buyers were receiving funds from the government. Johnson administration was responsible for the release of ESEA funds. Did not take long for these efforts to assist black people to end. That's what I was thinking, like Nixon probably nixed all of those programs. If this is like an LBJ, Greater Society programs from like the 60s, all of that stuff was gone in short order. Structural, physical makeup, and text. 1. Drum and Spear was originally located on 14th Street in Southeast D.C., in the heart of D.C.'s impoverished black community, so-called. As such, they were just around the corner from Howard University. I wonder what the author means by a conservative black university. I thought the same thing. Like, what does that mean? Because, see, I don't think that means the same thing when they say, like, Ronald Reagan is a conservative. Trump is a conservative. Like, I don't think they mean the same thing, but I could be wrong. Fuller does exercise caution with that C word, maybe making sure they do not upset racists, white supremacists, by, for example, denying Dr. Welsing tenure. That could be, but I'd need them to spell that out. Like, a conservative black person means you're anti-Welsing. I would need them, well, spell that out so we at least can be explicit so we know what to expect. And speaking of Welsing, so we did hear Welsing, Dr. Frances Cress, one time this week. She will pop up again as we continue. Be mindful, be alert, and in fact, it won't even just be a one-time thing. She will pop up a few times as we continue, so stay tuned. Let's see. To A History of Pan-African, C.L.R. James' History of Pan-African Revolt, Historical Analysis of Black Revolts from 1793 to 1969, The Book of African Names by Chief Ofuntoki. My apologies if I butchered that. Speaking Swahili, Children of Africa coloring book. I remember this was a period in which African Americans attempted to identify more with Africa, Africans. This included natural hairstyles, dress, dashikis, purchasing of African art, language being referred to as black, Afro-American as opposed to Negro. Prior to this, we were conditioned to think of being called African as a slur. Seems like that kind of rebounded, kind of got back there now. Promotion of the term African American is credited to Reverend Jesse Jackson. Here's a look at the origin of the term African American. 3. Gathering place for the entire gamut of the black community, so-called. Families to drug pushers, students to politicians, children to activists. Drug pushers? Question mark. BGQ, not sure this is a good idea. I did see that a few times. I'm not sure. I mean, especially if you're going to be selling like Iceberg Slim and all the rest of it. And it seemed like some of these folks, they were on the rehabilitation. Like maybe see if we can get the pushers and pimps in to read some of this material and change their behavior. But yeah, I could see that might be no drug environment. Sobriety would be best, especially they got all these children's books and things. Like, yeah, maybe no pushing. That's, yeah, not we trying to get rid of that. June Jordan, Vertime Grosvenor, Haki Matabuti, Jean Wiley, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, June Jordan, poet, essayist, and teacher at multiple colleges, passionate about using black English, identified as bisexual, whatever that means. Vertime Grosvenor, culinary anthropologist, griot, food writer. Haki Matabuti, author, educator, poet, founded Third World Press, which published the ISIS papers first time around. Jean Wiley, member of SNCC, where she was in charge of media communications, English professor at Tuskegee Institute, conceptualized and taught at the Center for Black Education at Drum and Spear. 5. What was amazing was you could see folks readily change. Unemployed. 5th, 6th grade education. Some did a little time in jail. They'd start with some lighter reading. Reading is more important than watching television. Absolutely. And I'll say one, you can even now start with so-called lighter reading. It doesn't even necessarily have to be fiction. You could start with the newspaper. They have articles and all kinds of nonfiction works that are shorter, so you wouldn't have to hurt your brain computer reading something that's 1,000 pages, 5 pages, 2 pages, something that you could finish easily in one day, one sitting. So there are lots of ways that you can do light lighter reading. And then when I read that portion and they were talking about this era of so-called Black Power, 1960s, 1970s, and we're told that the black literacy rates increased to approximately 95%. I don't believe that that is true. For the 1960s, really for what we just read, that portion where they said that some of these people would come in with a 5th or 6th grade education. I mean, if you're telling me you know your ABCs, so now you can read, like, I think the general standard is like, can you read and comprehend, like the New York Times? That's, I think, like a high school reading level. I'll double check, but that's generally the standard. If you can read at a 5th grade level or struggling to read at a 5th grade level, I'm not sure you could read the New York Times. At least, and get like comprehension and grasp everything that the article is talking about. I don't know. So I do not. And even if you told me right now, like for black people in this part of the world, the literacy rate is 95%, I wouldn't believe that now. Like, man, I listen to Bay Area Mom on a regular basis, and she talks about children in the school system, the same thing that we just heard, not reading on level, can barely read at all. No, I do not think that, even in this era of texting left and right, and you got to be able to read to get your Netflix right and all the rest of it, I do not think 95% of black people can, especially like functionally literate. Not at all. Let's see. Drum and Spear Bookshop members organized the first African Liberation Day in Washington, D.C. in 1970. Enlighten the black community about a variety of political issues, the armed struggle occurring in southern Africa, U.S. involvement in Chile, the anti-colonial struggles in Guyana, our favorite, the anti-Vietnam War protests. They recognize the importance that we are in a global system of racism, white supremacy. I do think that is very important. And I will say it seems like there might have been maybe a teaspoon more of that at that time in terms of discussing and thinking about white supremacy, racism in global terms. Now, certainly you got the Vietnam conflict and people being drafted. That will make you think in global terms. And then they're bombing slopes and slant-eyes. That will make you think of racism in global terms. Especially they trying to send Muhammad Ali in all this. Yes, certainly. So there were, and then everything happening on the continent as well. There were many things that would make you, at this time period, think in a global manner about white supremacy, racism, and even some of the more prominent people that were talking about racism at that time were talking in a global manner. Minister Malcolm X talking about what's happening in the Congo, talking about Vietnam, Muhammad Ali talking about Vietnam and all that. So that was maybe a little bit more prevalent, and I would submit humbly that's one of the big ones in terms of racists. They hate when non-white people start talking, because that's niggardly thinking. You're supposed to be really stingy-minded, really narrow view of the world, and it's about my block and my street and that type of thing, as opposed to the known universe. That is a very different way of thinking. So no surprise that they would want to get us out of that immediately. Like, no global system. Just get back on your block. Get back on your zip code. That's what the Negro's supposed to be about. I remember a demonstration I was in when blank was killed in Chile, and that was a major march. The blank word, I think, refers to Salvador Guillermo Allende. I think that's probably it too. The democratically elected Marxist president of Chile died in 1973. He died during a coup initiated and assisted by the U.S. CIA, also with endorsement of Henry Kissinger, Nobel Peace Prize winner, and Richard Nixon. An inquest many years later, including exhumation of his remains, concluded that Allende died by suicide. Why was the U.S. captured Venezuela's president, and what happens next. Let's see. 8, institution building. It wasn't a bookstore. Black controlled institutions within the black community, so-called. That was Drum and Spear Bookstore. VGQ. It is not possible to have a black controlled institution in a global system of racism, white supremacy. That is a big one. I certainly appreciate the efforts that they were making to establish something to disseminate information and to have really to have a code about how they go about getting this information out and disseminating on a large scale, even across the planet. But as we learned in Black-Owned, white people in many cases promptly shut these attempts at institutions down, and right quick in many instances. That's the system of white supremacy racism. Last one, non-national networks, organizer of radical black preschools in the D.C. area, Arsenal of Vital Black Material became the primary distributor for numerous renowned black preschools and black studies programs, which were emerging nationally at top universities. Arsenal may not be the best choice for a metaphor. I certainly can understand, since we're talking about books, that, there might be a different way of saying. I'm just double checking. Let's see. An arsenal, a collection of weapons, military equipment stored by a country, person, or group. Oh, wait a minute. An array of resources available for a certain purpose. Maybe that is an arsenal. And even with the first definition, reading is more important. I've said it seems, just the way that white people talk sometimes, that the books are more dangerous than the guns. Now, they don't let black people get too rowdy with firearms either, Philando Castile. But, they for sure, you're not going to get in a whole lot of books either. But yes, certainly, point taken. Books are the ISIS papers. That's in your arsenal. So I can't exactly say they were incorrect. Anywho, we'll pick up the rest later. The email again, untiljustice@gmail.com. The number 720-716-7300. The code 564943#. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Let's see, I'll nab a few of, the highlights I had from the first section, and then we'll get to audio segment number 2. Let's see. Go back to the beginning of chapter 7 here. Took a few more notes this week. Some of them I already got to, and just kind of picking up the first person who wrote in, getting their email. Let's see. Alrighty, for the beginning, where we start off this week, chapter 7. We heard quite a bit about Drum and Spear, even Louis Michaux in Black-Owned. So some of this should be familiar. Miss Richardson and Charlie Cobb and some of the other folks like heard this, yes. Repetition, got this, yes. Not, in my view, not a bad thing to get repetition on some. I don't think anybody here can say that they are an expert on the history of black literature and black bookstores. I certainly am not. So having read one book, not an expert, always good to get a little bit more detail. Sometimes they'll leave things out. Sometimes they'll add new information. So yes. Already said, I do not think 95% of black people could read at that, or had a 95% literacy rate then or now. Let's see. The word community is used quite a bit this week. VGQ, we talked about that many times. I guess that's been a habit that we've had for a long time. Black community, non-white community, lots of different variations. We don't have communities. Let's see. I will say though, and like I said, probably the context of this time period, but there did seem to be there certainly was a lot of squabbling and conflict between non-white people. Certainly. There did seem to be a little bit more. There is a global system. We should be studying this as a global system, maybe looking to see if we can learn from and have, constructive exchange with other non-white people, victims of white supremacy in different parts of the globe. There did seem to be a little bit more of that then than what I see now. Not totally, obviously. Ferguson, there were people, talking about that around the world, and Sandra Bland, George Floyd, but there does seem to, at least in the way that people talk about racism from what we're seeing here compared to what I hear frequently now in 2026. Let's see. So, as I said, we got one mention of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing already. She will come up again. And the first mention, even that was important in them talking about all of the different politicians, activists, drug pushers who hung out at Drum and Spear ostensibly for the betterment of black people. And dang, can you imagine an environment where you can just you can reliably go to the bookstore and know there's a pretty good chance I can bump into Dr. Wells and go, oh man, let's see what she's reading, or ask her about this, or what book did you think we should get next, or whatever. And Toni Morrison, all these other folks who are just right there at this critical moment, in time, where you can go and ask them about things and get their thoughts, or maybe they're going to do a lecture. Just wow, I could see why we aren't going to allow this to become a community. And particularly, you got black children. You take what Mumia Abu-Jamal said. He said you start the things that you read in your teens when you're a child, that rings in your mind, brain computer for the rest of your life, so-called. Maybe even just remember it. You remember it. Lasting influence. Imagine that. You were at the Black Bookstore, Drum and Spear, or Hakeem's, wherever, Liberation, and you were there at 10 and got a signed copy from Dr. Wells, signed copy of a book from Dr. Welsing, where she told you, the importance of studying, reading, not watching TV, staying sober, not being in conflict with black people at 10, 9, 12. Let's see. Or 39, 49, 59, 69. I could see that having a similar impact. Let's see. And hey, they took words right out of my mouth. This on page 192. What was amazing was that you could see folks readily change. You could see guys who were unemployed and who at that point, maybe 5th, 6th grade education, who had probably been through some kind of jail, and they would start some kind of light reading, and then she goes through the metamorphosis. And again, my view, that might be why they said, hey, drug dealer, come on in. Drug pusher, come on in. Drug user, come on in. Hey, that was Detroit Red, yes? They said that's the hottest book in the store, Minister Malcolm and all that. So that might have also greatly influenced why, no, we're not going to turn the drug pusher away either. Might be the next Detroit Red, which it could be. Let's see. They mentioned some of the so-called lighter reading. So they explain what some of that is. They said Tar Baby might qualify for what some of the light reading is. This, in case folks are not familiar with this one, this was 1967, Iceberg Slim, who gets mentioned a lot, think legal name Robert Peck, former pimp, whose writing deeply influenced the black noir genre. I'm reading this from offline. The title refers to a child born to a black female with a white trick. The blue-eyed Negro. The story follows Johnny O'Brien, known on the streets as White Folks, a light-skinned black male in Southside Chicago who can pass as white. Rejected by both white and black society as a trick baby, he uses his appearance to navigate and exploit racial dynamics for his cons. Mentored by an older black hustler named Blue Howard, Folks becomes a master of the long con. They often use the mark's own racism against them. Blue might play a vulnerable uncle figure being exploited by white folks to gain white targets' trust. The novel is a grim exploitation of mid-20th century urban life, highlighting the corruption of authority and the psychological impact of internalized and systemic racism. And I'll stop there, but they adapted this to television, so I guess this might be one, if you're talking about lighter reading, people would be familiar with it, right? And then Iceberg Slim was so popular, I think to a degree still is, so this might be one of those like, oh, okay, yeah, I can get in this, do this, boom, 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 not gonna hurt my brain computer too much, probably won't need the dictionary, or have to think too hard about what he means or anything of that nature, and then you can be done with it and move on, as opposed to Yurugu, might have to turn the TV off, get that dictionary, and do some real thinking. Let's see. I also think probably a lot of white people read Iceberg Slim as well, just based on our reading of Shaft, Ernest Tidyman. Let's see. The funding where she talked about Judy Richardson talking about Stanford, Cal Berkeley, some of the colleges, and then the neighborhood schools even making batch bulk purchases of books from these bookstores. I am sure white people wanted to cut that off immediately. Like, what? Y'all are buying school books from these niggers? Like, cut that all out. Come on. Let's see. I had mentioned before, like C.L.R. James and Frantz Fanon, a number of the folks who are mentioned here that we're doing all this championing of black culture and negritude are married to white women, white people. This comes up over and over again. I'm not saying that these folks should not be read or should be ignored or mistreated. I'm just pointing it out. Same thing I said with Frantz Fanon. Like, man, the book that they're saying is the Bible of the Black Revolution was literally transcribed by a white woman. I said that when we read it. Like, you talk about ultra pasteurized text. It has to be translated from French to English. It's transcribed. He was literally on his deathbed as he was writing that, Frantz Fanon. So his white partner, she's having to take dictation and write all this down, and then they edit it and transcribe it and packet it. Victims guaranteed qualified. Let's see. The networking I thought was so important. This massive reason. I mean, there's so many things here talking about racism from a global perspective, talking about racism and then sharing that information with other non-white people, to help other black people start a black bookstore. We heard some of that in Char Adams too. All of that I can see being something that white people would be majorly upset about and would be looking to sabotage immediately. Like, we are not going to let this get off the ground at all. Same way with the Black Panthers and all the rest of it. Like, get them squabbling, arguing, anything. We had talked about Guyana already in the text with Walter Rodney, who was bombed, assassinated, I believe, 1981. On page 204 of the dissertation, Beckles tells us about Mossack setting up the bookstore, first bookstore apparently in Guyana. And in 1963, she set up a bookstore in Guyana for Chetty Jagan, Guyana's opposition party leader. According to Mossack, in 1964, a bomb sent by CIA forces supporting majority party leader Forbes Burnham went off in the bookstore, killing her assistant and destroying the shop. However, the community rebuilt the shop in 6 weeks and renamed the shop after the assistant in his honor. Jim Jones was already rolling by this point, even though they were not in Guyana. And just for one, they said a bomb sent by the CIA. Okay. This is a year after the assassination of Kennedy, 1 year before the assassination of Minister Malcolm X, approximately 4 years after the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. So the CIA is up, and I mean rolling with these sort of projects and accident bombings in Guyana to blow up bookstores or kill black people that are being uppity. The long history of that sort of activity, and even rumored that's why the People's Temple chose Guyana. Further of this sort of instability and keep control, make sure we got things operating the way that we want. And got a matter of fact, Chetty Jagan married to a white woman. Lots of that throughout the text, I said. Anyway, let's see. Oh man, when they were talking about the books that were popular in this period that they stocked. So at Liberation Bookstore in New York by Miss Mossack, they said that the difference was that they stocked, it was more of a black class solution to racism. I don't know what that means either. They would have to break that down for me. And they said that they stocked writings of Lenin, Marx, Chairman Mao. I said, oh my goodness, we got Dr. Francis Cress Welsing would have such a big smile, the Marxist Leninist that was so popular, Angela Davis, Assata Shakur. Man, we had been, if we were around during that time period, maybe we would have been Marxist Leninist too. Let's see. Yeah, the class-based answer to the race problem. I don't know what that is. If anybody, if you are aware, if you find the so-called class-based solution to white supremacy racism, please share. Does that mean we need to get a lot of money? How much money? Crypto? Break it down for us. Let us know. And don't miss those steps. Let's see. When we heard of the Afro-Asian bookstore in Buffalo, Martin Sostre, S-O-S-T-R-A. We heard about him in Black-Owned, Char Adams. That was my first time hearing about him. And when they say the Afro-Asian bookstore in Buffalo, that was located in an internationally known city, Buffalo, his was a small black bookstore located in the poor black section of everyday Buffalo, East Side, Jefferson Avenue. As I said, not even 1 mile from where the Tops massacre happened in 2022. If it was there today, it would basically be like a half block from that Tops, and it would basically be directly across the street from the public library in Buffalo, and it would be right next to, I think it's either the Criterion or the Challenger, one of the black newspapers in Buffalo. I think it's the Challenger, but it would be right next to all of that, like the literal hub of where black people are warehoused in Buffalo. That's where the Afro-Asian bookstore was, Martin Sostre, and under attack from day one, as we read about in Char Adams. They have a book that was recently published about Mr. Sostre and his efforts in Buffalo to get books to black people and the terrorism that he was subject to by white people in Buffalo, them blaming him. The 1967 riot in Buffalo, they blamed him, said, oh man, we got this revolutionary Negro in here and peddling all these radical books and all the rest of it. Let's see, anything else? We stopped at the point where they were about to give more details about Mr. Sostre and him telling or explaining how he would allow young people like Mumia, maybe they didn't have a lot of money, but he would allow them to come and hang out in his shop and, you know, just listen to Malcolm X speeches or read books or talk to him, whatever, hang out type of a thing. But that, I think, is a part of building that Pan-African site of resistance, maybe even that so-called community that they keep talking about, where people can just come in, hang out, talk constructively, talk about racism. And even, it seems like for a lot of these folks, we've heard a big emphasis on children's books, having an environment, drug dealers notwithstanding, having an environment where black children can come with their parents, and they know we will have children's books, activities for children, and that we are welcoming them. We want their schools engaged, so that they know that we have books and content that they can bring into their schools that'll be great for their child's brain computer. But that seems to be a massive effort in this campaign. Get to the brain computers of these young black children, black boys and girls, so they can, you know, start thinking about these concepts, start having a different image of what it means to be black, what it means to be black all over the world, and different types of things that are happening, and then how we're thinking about racism and solving this problem. Brilliant. Brilliant. And again, probably why white people, FBI, we got to attack these Negro bookstores. Anywho, double check, make sure I didn't miss. If you have thoughts, observations to share, *61, and we will get to it if in the email untiljustice@gmail.com. We'll get to audio segment number 2. Folks don't have a thought to share. And then we'll have ample time for the second section of the dissertation. Dr. Colin Anthony Beckles, Pan-African Sites of Resistance, audio segment number 2.
A lot of youths, including teenagers, started hanging out in the shop. Some requested that I play certain records, which I did. In conversation, I would explain to them the tenets of black nationalism, socialism, and Afro-American history. I would illustrate my points by showing them photos and cartoons from books and magazines on the shelves. I taught continually, giving out pamphlets, free to those who had no money. I let them sit and read for hours in the store. Some would come back every day and read the same book until they finished it. This was the opportunity I had dreamed about, to be able to help my people by increasing the political awareness of the youth, of the thousands of titles which at one time or another passed on to or off my shelves. One name attracted the Afro youth more than all the rest: Malcolm X. Whether it was his autobiography, his speeches, the pamphlets and magazine articles about him, or his LP records, his was the magical name which made them respond. His books would sell so fast that I had a hard time keeping my shelves stocked. His books functioned as an introductory manual into revolutionary thought, the only thought that will free us from our oppressors. They would listen to Brother Malcolm because he was one of them. He talked their language. After reading and absorbing Malcolm's pamphlets, they then became receptive to the writing of other political thinkers, like Rob Williams, Nkrumah, Mao, and others. Because they were then about to relate these writings to what Malcolm had said, and could therefore easily perceive that their struggle for freedom lies squarely within the framework of the world liberation struggle. I made political hay in denouncing the police brutality going on outside to large crowds in the store. Then, After a rousing speech, I would go to the shelf and pick up an appropriate book or pamphlet like Robert F. Williams' Negroes with Guns, or Pre-Civil War Black Nationalism, or a pamphlet by Malcolm X, or Liberator magazine. Show them a photo or a drawing, or read an appropriate passage. With interest stimulated, I would make several sales and create several new freedom fighters. Sostre and Copeland, 1970. Organizing dimension. More evidence of the significant impact the Afro-Asian bookshop had on Buffalo's black youth is obtained by listening to the words of a former patron. Copeland, a member of the Martin Sostre Defense Committee, gives his view of the store role and its importance. The Afro-Asian bookshop was different. Martin Sostre's books did not speak of revolutions long gone or causes long forgotten. They spoke directly to the people of Cold Springs in their people's own language about problems in their own neighborhoods. The youths who read Martin's books got the idea right away, or pretty soon at least. The books were always about the rich and the poor, the masters and the slaves, the bosses and the workers, about white supremacy and who profits from it. The books were a call to action, and they spoke of a better world than the present one. Some of them explained socialism, some of them black self-determination. Some may have contradicted one another and did not necessarily make the path to freedom clear. Sostre and Copeland. International networks. In addition to Michaux, the influence of Drummond Sphere and liberation on black communities gained international attention. As such, black leaders and activists such as Kwame Nkrumah would seek out the stores. Drummond Sphere and liberation both had strong international ties with the fledgling bookstores and publishers in London, England. Periodically, the Huntleys from Bogle Levateur Press in London would fly over specifically to purchase books from Drummond Sphere and liberation bookstores and to exchange oral testimonies about the progress of the black liberation movement in their respective countries. Head Start, New Beacon, and Grassroots bookstores kept regular contact with their U.S. comrades. Patrons planning to go abroad were advised by bookstore staff to make contacts with the respective bookstores in either country. The stores essentially served as repowering stations for international activists traveling between countries. Therein, fatigued or disillusioned international travelers could meet and exchange information with locals and other travelers, pick up materials, or coordinate international information. Invariably, this interaction at the well had a recharging effect of a home-cooked meal. Chapter 7, Conclusions. The review of the bookshops in this chapter leads to the following 4 overall conclusions. First, in the tradition started by Michaux, new black bookshops emerged as sites of resistance for black communities across the U.S. during the 1960s. Moreover, a multidimensionality similar to Michaux was found to persist as a defining feature of those black bookshops. For example, the bookshops served as local archives, information centers, housing texts that provided alternative definitions of black identity. Also, given their social interaction structure and their limited numbers, they were magnets within the black community. As political and cultural wells, they functioned as gathering places for black activists, intellectuals, and local citizens involved in the black liberation movement of the U.S. and abroad. whether in the bookshops or in tandem with other institutions in their web of resistance, the bookshops became meeting and organization sites where informal teaching and debates occurred. Formal lectures were held, demonstrations were supported, and community education projects were organized. Indeed, these bookstores became political spaces wherein the racist definitions of black identity were contested and counter-hegemonic discourse was generated on a daily basis. Second, while some had the same black nationalist objectives as Michaux, we also noticed that other class-based perspectives emerged, necessitating their own alternative sites of resistance, such as liberation. However, whether Pan-African or Black Marxist sites of resistance, similarities in microstructure were found. Along the same lines, the size of the store was not a factor. Review of smaller bookstores in Buffalo and Baltimore revealed the same revolutionary social interaction structure which occurred in the smaller shops, with black counter-hegemonic discourse being produced and distributed from within the bookshop walls. Moreover, the import these similar sites of resistance had for their local communities was comparable as well. Third, due to the Black Power movement, there was a proliferation of black political groups, and these groups had definite attachments to particular bookstores. In turn, the philosophies of these political groups affected the stores. This brought the organizing dimension of the bookstores to the forefront, as this was a time period of rallies, demonstrations, and the establishment of black-controlled institutions. Finally, we noted that in terms of the bookstore network, local, national, and international connections intensified. This was no doubt facilitated by the connections with national and international political organizations such as SNCC. Moreover, because of the local, national, and international connections existing between bookstore owners and their members, a formidable web of resistance was formed among the bookstores across the transatlantic African diaspora. In the past two chapters, we have reviewed those black bookstores which have been significant since the Harlem Renaissance, and those that have come to prominence during the 1960s. We have examined their objectives, microstructure, and impact as sites of resistance at the local, national, and international level. Finally, we have examined the connections amongst themselves and with other institutions and political organizations. Given this, we now turn to examine how mainstream society reacted to these black houses of power. Chapter 8. The Attack on U.S. Black Bookshops, Government Repression, and Strategies of Resistance. While the various black bookshops reviewed all had periods of heightened social political influence and awareness, some eventually fell to the wayside. Two principal reasons have been reported for their demise: poor financial management and tactics of repression. Business versus politics. A common problem with maintaining the bookstores seems to be a conflict between business goals and political goals. Drum and Spear, for example, provides evidence on how this conflict manifested itself in two ways. First, despite customer demand and the potential profits to be made, Drum and Spear refused to carry best-selling books which the leadership considered politically incorrect. Richardson describes their experience. Richardson: because the second store, the satellite store, also did not make it because we found out that people wanted the pimp and trick lady book, the light lunch kind of book, and what ended up supporting us was the jewelry and the dresses and the children's books. The folks who were in and around the Hugh building were not as serious about their reading as we had assumed. We found we had to change what we normally carried at Drum and Spear, for example. We could not carry them at Malay Sum. Malay Sum is books in Swahili, but even doing that kind of change, it was difficult. Part of it was our politics. We did not want to carry some of the books that were selling, because we saw them not so much apolitical, but the wrong politics. These were not books that would nurture our communities, that we saw as representative of even the breadth of our communities. Richardson, 824. This first aspect of the business versus politics conflict hurt the bookstore in two ways. A, the store lost money by refusing to carry profitable yet politically incorrect books. B, they overinvested money in politically correct books that would not sell. The second conflict dealt with a general overextension of funds. For example, the Drum and Spear leadership decided to extend their political influence internationally via the establishment of similar institutions on the African continent. The consequence was that staff and resources were both directed and expended towards fulfilling these political goals. Accordingly, this was at the expense of the entire operation. Richardson elaborates. We expanded very quickly. We sent Cortland and Jennifer over to Tanzania. There were some factors that had nothing to do with the politics, but it did. It just meant we had certain politics that made us feel that we should do certain kinds of moves, which I think were really good, but financially, I'm not sure that it helped us. Richardson, 894. Thus stated, it must be expressed clearly that while poor financial management was reported as one of the demise factors, it was not the only one. Indeed, what they did to themselves was not considered to be as significant as what was done to them. In other words, the destruction of their economic markets and the repeated fervent harassment by the U.S. government and other forces on the bookstore. We turn now to examine this situation. Agents of repression. In 1967, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover initiated a phase of his counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, directed specifically at destabilizing the Black Power movement. Hoover stated in FBI Memorandum 22433-40, the purpose of this new counterintelligence endeavor is to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the activities of black nationalists, hate-type organizations, and groupings, their leadership, spokesmen, membership, and supporters, prevent the coalition of militant black nationalist groups, prevent black nationalist groups and leaders from gaining respectability, prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement, King, Carmichael, Elijah Muhammad. Churchill and Vanderwall, 1988. These Black Pro maneuvers served as formidable structural forces hampering the Black Power movement, as radical black organizations and their leaders were targeted for elimination by U.S. government forces. As this section demonstrates, except for a brief mention in the work in Churchill and Vanderwall, absent from the historical record is the fact that black bookstores were targeted as well. As one former bookstore member stated, the government and also certain forces within the black community saw these information and cultural centers as a real threat. Muse, 794. A second structural factor influenced the demise of the bookstores. As noted above, the Black Studies movement of the mid-1960s provided an institutionalized market for black bookstores and supported in part by federal education funds. However, with the conservative trend of the Nixon administration, these same Black Studies departments and the black students who supported them came under economic and ideological siege. Allen succinctly describes the situation. In 1972, the counterattack against Black Studies started in earnest. Cutbacks in department budgets and student aid, especially at public institutions, forced the dismantling of many programs and curtailed student enrollment. In 1973, for the first time in a decade, the percentage of black youth entering college decreased. This decrease, along with repression, signaled the end of the black student movement, which had been the chief supporter of Black Studies. It was militant Negro students, often academically marginal, who, in the words of Black Studies critic Martin Kilson, were accused of making trouble. Moreover, according to these critics, these ill-suited Negro students were often aided and abetted by Black Studies departments of questionable academic validity. From this, it was an easy step for college administrations to rationalize shifting cutbacks to Black Studies programs and black student enrollment in the secure knowledge that the enemies of Black Studies would provide ample justification for the attack. Allen, 1974. Given these attacks, the struggle for Black Studies was losing ground, and programs began to close around the country. A vital source of revenue for the black bookstores was increasingly becoming non-existent. Below, examine how the combination of poor financial management and other government forces of passive and aggressive repression took their toll on radical black bookstores. We begin in Harlem with Michaux. Passive repression, forced relocation, surveillance, harassment. Michaux' National African Memorial Bookstore. It is only a matter of time before the powers that be attempt to neutralize or eliminate altogether sites of dissent deemed influential. Along these lines, when a particular site of dissent, especially one with a 40-year history, is forcibly relocated, a shockwave of disruption seems obvious to follow. Michaux's bookshop appeared to have fit the bill as a Pan-African site of resistance and became the aim of U.S. government eradication. Richardson of Drum and Spear gives her comments on the situation. Interviewer: did you know if Michaux's bookstore was harassed? Richardson: what happened to Michaux's was that they did them in with the state office building. The people came in and made it rubble, tore it down, and built the state office building. Specifically, Michaux received notices from New York Governor Rockefeller's state office declaring that the state must clear his building and the block to make way for a new state office building. In 1968, Michaux was evicted, and the entire city block was leveled. The bookstore was temporarily relocated and promised housing in the new state-owned building. Liberation Books. Due to her experience in Guyana regarding bomb explosion planted by CIA which destroyed her bookstore and killed an assistant, Una Mulzac of Liberation Bookstore always worked with the knowledge that she and the bookstore would be put under surveillance, even eliminated if necessary. As it turned out, her suspicions were valid. An FBI member, sympathetic to the struggle, reported to Miss Mulzac that the store was under surveillance for dissemination of subversive literature. This same person also reported that undercover Agents were hanging out at the store posing as customers, trying to track, monitor the whereabouts of black activists who would frequent the store. Drum and Spear Bookshop. Drum and Spear's demise in 1972 was blamed on a number of things. One of the major reasons was the attack on the Black Studies departments, their primary institutional buyers. I think part of it was the demise of some of the Black Studies departments. Also, some of the schools were using our books. Well, when Nixon comes in, all of that funding drops out. At the time, the major places that used to buy from us are going under because the schools are no longer supporting this kind of African Studies department. Richardson, 894. However, in addition to the above, the most strongly cited reason was the harassment. Because Drum and Spear was the only radical black bookshop in the D.C. area, they were the target of harassment from their inception. The first incidents involved surveillance by the FBI. Questioning and surveillance was originally restricted to the shop. They would come in, and you always knew that's who they were. They had those funny suits and the little ties and stuff, and they were one of the few white people who would come in the store. And they would come in and get Mao's Red Book, and they would get stuff that you knew the type they would not be getting those kinds of titles. And they would spend lots of money on the books, and they would walk out with them. Richardson, 894. Following the surveillance tactics, harassment of their primary buyers was documented by bookstore staff. The local student body members at Howard University were warned by university officials to stay away from the bookshop. We had enough problems with Howard University telling their students that we were a radical bookstore and that they shouldn't come over, on top of which we were on 14th Street and we were in the black community and the ghetto and shouldn't walk through it. Richardson, 894. The Afro-Asian Bookshop. The smaller stores experienced passive repression tactics as well. From the day the store was open, Solstory's bookshop in Buffalo was continually harassed by the police, FBI agents, and vandals. Again, we turn to Solstory to document the evidence in his own voice. Several months after I opened the shop, I had two visitors who, after some careful browsing, came to the counter, identified themselves as FBI agents, and asked me if I was the proprietor. Upon getting the affirmative, they came right to the point. The gist of it being, was I affiliated with any socialist or communist group, and why was I selling this type of literature? My answer was that I was not affiliated with any group, and that as an owner of the bookstore, I alone determined what books were sold in my shop. That this right is guaranteed me in the First Amendment of the Constitution. They obviously did not like my reply, but they left without further comment. 2 months later, 2 city detectives from the Subversive Squad, now the Narcotics and Intelligence Squad VC, visited my shop. They were not as polite as the federal agents. They identified themselves, and one of them said, "Nice place you got here, Marty. You're doing all right for yourself since you got out of prison. What are you doing behind this bookstore front?" I told him this was no front, that I was working at Bethlehem Steel and operating a bookshop, that I had paid my debt to society for the mistakes I made in the past, and was now living the life of a law-abiding citizen. The other detective said, "A law-abiding citizen doesn't get involved in hate literature and communist propaganda." I then repeated what I had told the federal agents regarding my rights to sell literature of my choice. One of them replied, "Okay, Marty, have it your way." I noticed, also during the period of uneasy lull following the revolt, June 30th through July 4th, that in addition to the increased number of police cars patrolling the area with their windshields, back and side windows taped to prevent shattering when struck by bricks and bottles, more cars appeared carrying police brass and civilian high officials, and these would slow down upon approaching the area of the bookshop, and all their attention would focus on the bookshop and the entire length of the bulletin board. It became evident that our activity had come to the attention of high officials. One morning when I came into the store, the posters had been ripped off, and that unsuccessful attempts had been made to rip the others off. They were too tightly glued to be ripped off. A taxi driver, who works on the night shift, came to the shop an hour after I had opened the door to inform me that he had discovered local cops ripping the posters down after I closed the shop at 2 or 3 a.m. Sostra in Copeland, 1970. The Black Book. News of these attacks and harassment by the FBI and police spread across the bookstore network. As such, other black bookstore owners operated their stores under the reasonable assumption that they too were under surveillance and could possibly be attacked. Coates lived with the fear that his bookstore would be firebombed because of his activities and past leadership role with the Black Panthers. However, he also believed that the bookstore was protected somewhat due to its proximity in the heart of Baltimore's black community, and that this was the primary reason the store was not attacked. Still, Coates operated the store in a psychological state of preparedness, a mentality of vigilant defense. Hakim's books. Hakim always operated under the assumption that the store was being monitored. Evidence of such monitoring came when inspection of the files at FBI headquarters in Media, Pennsylvania, revealed that the store had been under surveillance for dissemination of subversive literature.
Katherine Massey Book Club, context of white supremacy. I was exciting because I was looking at the next section of the text on 232. Aggressive repression, heavy surveillance, assassinations, all my favorite, tax games, and legal lynching. That's all coming up next week, and more Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. And really, now we're getting into why did we read this book? Why did we read this dissertation, Katherine Massey Book Club, after we read Black-Owned? I said, if someone said they were going to do a study of black bookstores, and specifically in the U.S., this project is larger than that, but you're going to do a focus on black bookstores in the U.S., don't you think Dr. Francis Cress Welsing and Neely Fuller Jr. should pop up in there for a variety of reasons? Absolutely. I said there's no way that you should be able to write such a project or documentary, whatever it is, and these names, Fuller, Welsing, be absent. Shouldn't happen. I said we got an example of that project right here. We're about halfway through the book, maybe a tad more, and already had one Welsing mentioned, and we will have more by the time we get through. I think next week we'll get even more appropriate to now getting into the details of the U.S. repression of black bookstores and literature that could be described as counter-racist. But that's why we are reading this lengthy academic study, and hopefully, folks get a little detail out of this. And even this is the sort of project you will not find in a black bookstore or a white bookstore, because they generally don't have dissertations. This is the sort of thing where I say going to college libraries, even a community college library in your area, you can be Mark Furman. They have a lot of information that a general bookstore, even a general public library, will not have, and you will see there's one subject white people study above everything else: the system of White Supremacy Racism, because that's connected to everything. Woo, they have so much information piled up on that. Anywho, the number 720-716-7300. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Let me finish up our email. The first email from today. I've forgotten. I had to go back and get what I left over from last week, so I got that corrected. Now I can just finish up the emails from this week and be right back on it. Okay, emails from, email number 1 from this week. For example, Dr. James Turner up at Cornell would buy books from us. Dr. Turner was appointed as director of Cornell University's newly formed Africana Studies and Research Center in 1969. 7 months after its opening, the building was burnt down by what Turner believed was arson. I thought we heard that mentioned in the text. Deliberate arson and burning down buildings and all that. I hope they got it restored and built back promptly, but man. 11. Owuzu Oki was then head of Malcolm X University in Greensboro. The full title is Malcolm X Liberation University, founded in 1969 by Howard Fuller, aka Owuzu Sadokai, in response to a black student takeover of a building at Duke University. The school never obtained adequate funding and closed in 1973. That seems like standard operating procedure for black institutions of learning, counter-racist efforts. 12. Interviewer. What about local, national, or international bookstores? Richardson. Oh yeah, we would always call, for example, we knew all the other black bookstores in the country, Bogle and New Beacon, London, England bookshops. We just heard about them. People would come in from other parts of the world. A lot of our folks had been internationally connected. Connections with international victims of racism and suspected racist white supremacists, especially through interviews, is one of the unique and constructive aspects of the C.O.W.S broadcasts. Networking skills are a little lacking for Gus T. 13. Liberation Bookstore was a perfect site for blacks looking for a class-based answer to the race problem. A black Marxist perspective, if you will. The concept of class is a continual source of confusion among victims of white supremacy. Hey, at this time, I think Dr. Welsing may have had a few remnants left of her thinking of, I'm a Marxist-Leninist. And certainly Angela Davis, like, it would have been a lot of, apparently you could have stayed in business. If you had like your Negro Marxist-Leninist bookstore, you good to go. And white people might leave you alone. Maybe. Black Panthers such as Assata Shakur and she said she was a Marxist-Leninist too. Frequented the store. See C.O.W.S Book Club selections, Assata, an autobiography by Assata Shakur, and Inadmissible Evidence. I do want to say we have read 4 works in a row that reference Assata Shakur. Her memoir, or excuse me, scratch that. We read Evelyn Williams. Then we read Tonight We Bombed the U.S. Capitol. And then we read Black-Owned, and now here. 4 books in a row, or 4 works in a row, 3 books, 1 dissertation, that mention Assata, and 4 in a row that mention COINTELPRO. How many book clubs can say that? Or how many book clubs would be something to brag about? And then forget the brag, how many book clubs can even say that? Not even planned, even kind of random, selections. 15, Aquarian Books, who we heard about previously. Ron Karenga's United Slaves Organization, who I think was also in Black-Owned. Protest artist Frank Green both used the store to present their works or hold meetings during the 1960s. Ron Malana Karenga, 1941, also noted for creating Kwanzaa, is often mentioned on the C.O.W.S for reels. Additionally, his life has been embroiled in a variety of controversies, including felony convictions for assault, accusations of being an informant, which has also been lobbed from the cows, for the FBI. There's no definitive proof of this. He is currently chair of Africana Studies at California State University, Long Beach. I could not find any information on Mr. Green. I'll make a comment about that. Oh, Mr. Green, wait a minute. Did we want information on Mr. Green? Let's see if we can knock that down right quick, maybe. Let's see. I thought I had pulled that up. Let's see. Or if I didn't, then I pulled that up. Give me 1 second and I'll give that. They did have information about Frank Green. 1 second, we'll come back to it. 17, to make available to the black and white communities, in addition to the aforesaid books, the so-called controversial or leftist literature, the voice of protest and dissent, the other side of the story. I wonder how much of the so-called white community used the bookstore in a constructive manner. Great point. Particularly university whites, because, I mean, you already had a number of white people who they were writing books, James Baldwin and all of that, so they could have, hey, let me get, 30 copies of James Baldwin. Let me get 50 copies, Toni Morrison. You get that sort of thing. They could have had a real impact. And, I'm not just going to say I'm a white ally. Like, hey, I'm going to put my wallet down and I support black books. I support black businesses right here. Please. Let's see. 18. One name attracted the Afro youth more than all the rest, Malcolm X, whether it was his autobiography, speeches, pamphlets, magazine articles, LP records. His was the magical name which made them respond. The autobiography may be a good entry point for getting young black people reading today. I will keep it in mind. I think when we say young black people, I generally think like children, 20 and under, maybe 25 and under, maybe, but I was, kind of been a little late, but absolutely. I think that age group, it's written. I think the vocabulary level is one that you could actually read if you're 17, 18, if you read on level, which, we've heard is kind of a problem for some victims of racism who are a little young and even a little older. But I think that's one that you can read. They have audio. Hey, we did read that in the Katherine Massey Book Club, and they do have unabridged audiobooks. So that's one that you can listen to and I think get a lot of constructive information. And I've heard that from other people as well, that they read Malcolm X. It was so riveting and captivating that kind of alerted them like, oh, wow, there are books that are interesting that I would enjoy equal to or more than television. Wow. Let me see if I can find some others. And then they go from there. I've heard that repeat for generations. I've heard that. Let's see. 19. Robert F. Williams, Negroes with Guns, another text often discussed on the cows, which is where I first learned of it. We did do a book review of Negroes with Guns. And in fact, Robert F. Williams and Mabel Williams, his wife, they have a brand new autobiography. We are the biography kings. They have a brand new autobiography that kind of covers their life and times and all of their efforts. Well, I won't say all, but I mean, it's kind of, it is chunky. I would say this is one that is not liked reading because it's kind of two memoirs in one. Like the first chunk of it is Robert F. Williams, the old privileged black male, but he goes through his life and times and blah, blah, blah. And then the second chunk of it goes through Mabel Williams, where she goes through her life and times and what they were doing and going to Cuba and all that. Global. So and it just came out like literally days ago. Robert F. Williams, Mabel Williams memoir, their time in attempted counter-racist efforts. 20. International networks stores essentially serve as repowering stations for international student activists traveling between countries. Fatigued, disillusioned, international travelers could meet and exchange information with locals, and other travelers pick up materials, coordinate international information. Invariably, this interaction at the well had a recharging effect of a home-cooked meal. Metaphor. For me, the cows is a recharging station. I'll take that as a compliment, but our networking is a little lagful. Mumia did say the meal thing. They got all the meal metaphors. He said he devoured, or he was going to put some hot sauce on Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth and eat the whole thing too. Like, delectable Negro. Let's see. For conclusions, Black Power movement establishment of black controlled institutions, formidable web of resistance across transatlantic African diaspora, VGQ, victims guaranteed qualified, Black Power, black controlled institutions, formidable. Much of this section seems aspirational, which I'm all right with, as opposed to the reality of the situation. Now that we do need, strive for accuracy. We don't want to be hopeful. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We don't have a community. And I mean, that's a big one because that word was used so much this week. We do not have communities, not even close. 8. Really would be no need for black bookstores if we had communities, because they would have all of the goodies and things that we need at the regular bookstore, the regular library. Chapter 8, the attack on U.S. black book shops, government repression, and strategies of resistance. 1. Business versus politics. A common problem with maintaining the bookstores seems to be a conflict between business goals and political goals. The store lost money by refusing to carry profitable yet politically incorrect books. They overinvested money in politically correct books that would not sell. The second conflict dealt with a general overextension of funds. This was discussed in the previous text, Black-Owned. However, the ultimate reason for the failure is not poor business practices, but the racist white supremacists doing what they do best. I do just want to point out, we've seen other successful examples of businesses where they make political decisions about their inventory. Whole Foods, they don't sell Snicker bars. They don't sell Cheetos. They don't sell Coca-Cola. It's not that they don't think they could make money on these items. That is a part of the politics of the business. And they still make a lot of money, even though you can't get no Cheetos at Whole Foods. That's what I'm saying. Like, that exists. You can make a business decision in the system of white supremacy and still be successful. No, I don't think we need to have Trick Baby in the store. Or if that's, I don't think we need to have a whole lot of books that are going to promote gender conflict and have black males and black females fussing and blaming each other. No, I don't think we need to have that. And that extend on up to that. We have Isabel Wilkerson, Warmth of Other Suns. We don't have Cased. Now, I'm not saying it has to be all the way through, but I mean, man, it would be real hard. Now, are we going to have all this fiction and silliness and gender? Are we going to have all of that just so that we can pay the rent? Now, we heard folks, talking about having to make that decision, and some folks to say, hey, so we can keep the store open. We got to sell some Waiting to Exhale. We got to sell some Toni Morrison. She said she paying our rent. We got to get Toni Morrison in here to sell some of the rent. That's not what we wanted, and all that fiction, but we heard all that. Even that, white people are most to blame. Period. Now, even I do remember they talked about Drummond Spears specifically saying, man, we had 100 copies of the Bible of the Negro Revolution, old Frantz Fanon, and we couldn't move 99 copies of it. Mumia bought the only one. I'd like to say I'm being facetious, but not really. They said they had about 100 copies and they sold like 5 of them. Mumia maybe bought all 5. Anyway, but most to blame, white. But even that, Frantz Fanon, who most to blame for that? Married to a white woman. Who most to blame for that? Who most to blame for that? Black people did all that traveling to go and figure out Frantz Fanon. We need to read Wretched of the Earth. That's what's going to get us where we need to go. And even I have to say, a whole lot of this is focused on sex. Not all, but a lot of it. Trick Baby and Black Skin, White Mask, Brand Fanon. A lot of that is focused on Area 8. CLR James wrote a lot of race and sex. A lot of this ends up focusing on Area 8. And it's not just, let's be quick and tidy about this. No sex with white people. This is the reason why. And moving forward, it's a lot of titillation and fake romance and tackiness and time wasting. It's a lot of that, which continues on today. Let's see. The reduction of these grants that allowed for colleges and other institutions to purchase books. I jumped ahead of myself because I said that during the first audio segment that Richard Nixon, he is going to eradicate all of these LBJ Great Society programs, especially if this is getting more of these rowdy Negro students, and we're going to have more Dr. Welsing saying, I want to study and be a counter-racist scholar and write some, get rid of all that. We don't need no more of that. Even Dr. Huey P. Newton, we don't need no more of that. If that's what the school is going to get, but drop out. We need to get the pipeline rolling, and right now. Let's see. For the first time in decades, the percentage of black youth entering college decreased. Militant Negro students, often academically marginal, who in the words of black studies critic Martin Kilson were accused of making trouble. I found this interesting. This is the time period when I entered college. You got one of them old educational subnormal. That's what it made me think of when he said they got these old academically marginal students, and in these old academic programs that are also marginal. This is some old pseudo-scientific study, black study, just in here to cause trouble and mess things up for whitey. That's basically, what they said. Let's see. And then we'll get to the harassment. Cannot wait. The last two. He said in 1972, the counterattack against black studies started in earnest. Cutbacks in department budgets, student aid, especially at public institutions, forced the dismantling of many programs and curtailed student enrollment. These racists were already dismantling programs just 3 years after inception. Did not take them long to reverse course at all. And that's standard operating procedure for this time period, where they'll make it seem like, hey, the Congo is liberated, Patrice. We didn't kill the policeman. We're going to take all that. We didn't even make one step forward. We made we were trying to get a toe forward. And bam, they done amputated the whole foot, and we done fell 50 yards back. Like, dang, we ain't made no progress at all. No progress at all. Let's see. Passive repression, forced relocation, surveillance. Michaux received notices from New York Governor Rockefeller's state office declaring that the state must clear his building and block to make way for a new state office building. In 1968, Michaux was evicted and the entire city block was leveled. The bookstore was temporarily relocated and promised housing in the new state-owned building. Population dislocation. Evelyn Williams did talk about that. Yep. And in New York as well. She did talk about that in great detail. Drum and Spear's demise in 1972 was blamed on a number of things. One of the major reasons was the attack on black studies departments. Their primary institutional buyers, Nixon, comes in, all that funding drops out. Buyers, white people, they were the target of harassment from the inception. Surveillance by the FBI, harassment of primary buyers. Student body members at Howard University were warned by university officials, stay away from the bookshop. We had enough problems with Howard University. The Afro-Asian bookshop, Sostray's bookshop in Buffalo, was continually harassed by police, FBI agents, and vandals. And I do want to say police, FBI agents, vandals may all be one in the same. Anyway, the segment about Howard, it gave me pause. I said, so Howard telling them stay away from the rowdy bookshop, don't go around there with them niggers. Is that being conservative? They'd have to tell me, like, I'm not I don't know. Tell me, is that conservative? And then and this is the same time that Howard University was giving Dr. Welsing a tough time. I don't bring any of this up to besmirch Howard University and their reputation. They're victims of white supremacy as well, the black people affiliated, but we don't have communities, and that's an even more stark illustration. You don't have no institutions in the system of white supremacy. The white people, they have institutions, and they are institutions of white supremacy. We don't have that. Howard is named after a white person. We're not going to have no Dr. Welsing coming in here talking about no counter-racist scholarship and her theory of white genetic annihilation and research. We're not even going to let you use our copier. Get on out of here. And we're going to tell them on the way, and stay away from that Negro bookstore. And they still rob Howard of their funding. So, the Black Book Coates, he also believed that the bookstore was protected somewhat due to its proximity in the heart of Baltimore's black community. That word, again, I need to count just to see for this week how many times was the word community used, and that this was the primary reason the store was not attacked. The victims guarantee qualified, protected somewhat because they were in the community. Interesting. The word community is used a lot in this text when referencing victims. I just said that. In the name of Freddie Gray, it is hard for me to think a black bookstore, where would we be safe at? I know. Where'd the nigger stay at? That's what would be good. What? What? Why? Why would I think we would? What protection? What protection to the black? So forget the bookstore, because I think that's more difficult to predict. So if it was just me, why would I think in a system of white supremacy racism it would be safer for me to go hide where it's a whole bunch of black people, because that environment will offer me some protection? I mean, I guess in comparison to walking alone through a sundown town, I guess, like, if that's what we're talking about, like, I mean, they're not going to let you put your bookstore there or let you loiter there. So I don't know if that's even on the table for an option, but I just don't understand why that would make you think that this is going to offer me some like, none of the people there are protected from each other or white people. So why would that be protection for the bookstore? I do not understand it all, but I'm no Freddie Gray. And the water is the water is bad where the black people live in Baltimore, unless I've been confused. I don't think I am. Name of Freddie Gray. The water is bad where the black people live. I don't think that's no new thing. Maybe I'm mistaken. Trump did tell us it was a hellhole there. Might have got, some bad propaganda about good old Maryland. Hakeem's books. Evidence of such monitoring came when inspection of the files at FBI headquarters in Medea, Pennsylvania, revealed that the store had been under surveillance for dissemination of subversive literature. They have whole books about Medea, and that was white people that broke in Medea and did all this. I don't think they were punished either. And we will stop there. Looking forward to next week. Again, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing will pop up in the text again next week. I cannot wait. So looking forward to it. And we'll get to see, like, in the way, even the way that you heard her mentioned this week, and saying that Dr. Welsing was a part of that milieu in the 60s and 70s of, you go to the bookstore and look who's here. Oh, wow, this is a regular thing. And you go ask her a quick question, and what they doing to you at Howard? They messing over you, chewing you, man. Like, what sort of experience that would have on, and why these stores would be sites to target, and why I said it should be no way that you write a book or do a project about black bookstores in the U.S., maybe the world. I would have to see, how influential was the ISIS papers and, black bookstores in Jamaica, black bookstores in the UK, black bookstores in France, how influential. But at minimum in the U.S., there should be no way you can do a project both with the impact of the book itself and the fact that you have to go to the stores to get the book, and the lectures and her being there and all of that. Like, come on. And Fuller as well. They had, I would say, over the past 50 years, how many black nonfiction artists had a greater impact than those two? All right. Let's see. I'll do some of my notes, see if folks have any thoughts they need to share before we wrap up this chunk of the reading, and then we'll wrap for this week reading of the dissertation. Let's see. Scrolling back through, get back to where we started at with the Buffalo Bookstore, Martin Sostre. I will say, I guess, to balance, since there is so much on community, there is also a lot of global. I'd said that before, and it just continued in the second portion of the reading. Global focus of white supremacy racism. It is not isolated to just the U.S. or even just the South here. It is global problem, and studying what's happening to non-white people, black people throughout the known universe, which I think is, like I said, it's, at least that's my impression. I could be in error. That is, there's less of that now than there was at this time. Let's see. Amongst non-white people, victims of racism. The second portion here, getting back to the first section where Martin Sostre, where he talks about the young people being allowed to just come in and sit and read. They could come, if they didn't have money to purchase the book, they could just come and sit on the floor and read as much as they could that day, come back the next day, keep on reading, come back he said that was his vision. Like, what kind of capitalist are you? I mean, they'll boot you out for that sort of thing. And something like, hey, you don't come and, pawn our merchandise and mess up the pages, and who wants to read it after you got your grubby fingerprints, all over it? Like, who wants that? Some folks, they'll tell you, like, hey man, I'll let you come in here and sit one day. You have to beat it. And that wasn't my vision. I didn't, think that I was going to have a whole bunch of, Negro children sitting around in my shop all day, coming in here being loud, laughing, talking after they get out of school. That alone is wacky. And then this is what I wanted. I wanted to be the one so those young children get to their brain computer and encourage them to read, and read seriously, read about racism, nonfiction. Like, wow. That is, I see why they had to shut Mr. Sostre's Buffalo Bookstore down immediately. And he said doing all that to increase political awareness of young black children. That is crazy talk. Let's see. Mr. Sostre, he talks about the books that he chose. He said the youths who read Martin's books got the idea right away, or pretty soon at least. The books were always about the rich and the poor, the masters and the slaves, the bosses and the workers, the white and the non-white, about white supremacy and who profits from it. The books were a call to action, and they spoke of a better world than the present one. Some of them explained socialism, some of them black self-determination. Some may have contradicted one another and did not necessarily make the path to freedom clear. That is common. You will have to follow logic. Let's see. That's kind of wild. Like, he has recharging centers as metaphor, and we are way before the iPhone and charging stations and all the rest of it, but whatever. I did pause in the interim. I did look for Mr. Green. I did find that information. I have to get that in a moment. I did look for this bombing of the bookstore in Guyana. I did find information about this, and apparently there is a thread that people do think the CIA, well, one, the CIA was active in this area at this time and engaged in activities like this. Even when I looked, they also brought up the Walter Rodney bombing that was in 1980. I think I said 81 before, it was in 1980. But they were engaged in activities like this, that there may be some others who speculate the CIA was involved in this bombing of the bookstore down in Guyana, killing a black person, standard operating procedure. Let's see. The attack section. Again, we talked about this last time around in terms of which books to select. And I'll just give the footnote at the bottom, since that's not, there are footnotes with this. Obviously, it's a dissertation. It's footnote 32 at the bottom of 219, excuse me. Poor financial management refers to decisions concerning how store monies would be allocated. For example, should monies be spent to stock the store with one type of material versus another? When should monies be spent on expanding the scope of the store? Thus, poor financial management, in quotes, is not meant to imply that embezzlement or other internal business crimes were occurring. Got it. And I hadn't heard that before. I don't think we heard that before. We just heard, buying 100 copies of Franz Fanon type of thing. Or we're not going to sell Trick Baby, that sort of thing, in terms of, maybe these are bad financial moves. Again, like I said, Whole Foods, they don't sell Snickers. They're doing okay. Are you telling me to have a black bookstore to be in existence, you gotta sell Trick Baby? You gotta sell The Hate You Give? Is that what you're telling me? Let's see. Oh, and it continues. Judy Richardson with Drum and Spear. Because the second store, the satellite store, also did not make it because we found out that people wanted the Pimp and Trick Lady book, the light lunch kind of book. I even have to pause right there. What is a light lunch book in the context of white supremacy racism? Is the Pimp Trick Lady book, that's what black people wanted to read? Like I'm on the plantation, literally, I get my lunch break where they didn't call me nigger and I had to gripe and fight to get my paycheck for the day and all the rest of it. I get my little hour break to go eat my ham sandwich and Cheetos. I don't want to read nothing heavy. Don't you give me no Dr. Welsing or nothing like that. Don't put no Neely Fuller Jr. down. Don't put no, bell hooks and Chancellor Williams. Get on out there, Toni Morrison. Give me some old Trick. Give me some old Trick Baby. Give me some old Iceberg Slim. Let me read about the Pimp in my spit. Like, what? Now, to a degree, I said that's crazy, but I mean, hey, that is how we've been conditioned. I mean, Shaft and all the rest. I can look at what we watch now. Yeah. That's how we get conditioned. And I mean, I don't know. I guess it would take some time to kind of, hey, we have greater priorities than pimps. And oh, now, is that Negro culture? That's how we've been conditioned? I did keep playing that when we were listening to Jonestown. The great Too Short, either the world is filled with pimps and hoes. We just talk about those I knows. Come on. Negro culture. Like, and white people are most to blame. And you would need bookstores and people all the way back to David Ruggles to change this. Even if you don't change it with that. Detroit Red, man. There would have to be an effort. Might be slow going, especially since, a lot of people think it's a little bit more entertaining to watch TV, read about pimps and hoes than Yurugu. Some of this stuff kind of sad, I've been told. Kind of boring, I've been told. Hey, that might be a tough sell that we need to put that pimp book down. We got more serious things to attend to, and even the reading level. If I can only read at a 5th grade level, that Pimps and Hoes book might be about as far as my vocabulary is going to take me. There's a lot of levels to it. Like, man. Let's see. And we had heard that before, that they had to do other inventory beyond books, jewelry, crafts, artwork, music, who knows, anything, incense, anything but books, because we ain't coming in there to buy no books. We already got 15 copies of Malcolm X's autobiography, so I ain't buying no more of them. Let's see. Matter of fact, I even asked online. I asked the bot, y'all have to check me to see. We were talking about this very concept, and I said, man, I ain't heard nothing about Char Adams Black-Owned being, this is the best book that we need to read, and black people going crazy about it, like in comparison to The Hate You Give, Cased, books that I think are absolutely, you can talk about wretched, some of the worst reading I think you could do. I heard all kinds of non-white people, older non-white people, younger non-white people, all kinds, black people that were in school, black people that were not in school, just going wacky about those 2 books. I didn't hear a peep about Char Adams. Not one word. I think that book is way more constructive than those other 2 books that I just named. System, even what gets advertised, what we are receptive to read, even how we find out about, things to read and all that. But I said that to the chatbot. I said, what I just said to you all. I said, man, do you see the same sort of hoopla and celebration for Char Adams Black-Owned as you do for The Hate You Give? And even the dumb chatbot said, well, that is a good point. That is more of a niche book. You're not going to have people that are, one, it's not going to be promoted as much to, let's be systemic. We're not looking for a good white person, because that's how Cased ends. Good white people, that's not what we're looking for. We're doing an analysis of how the system restricts black people's access to serious counter-racist literature. The bot said, oh, that's niche. Like, you thought we want light lunch reading? This ain't light lunch reading. We're talking serious counter-racist study, and white people have structured things. Most non-white people, we are not reading. We are not interested in doing those serious counter-racist study. And in fact, they have neutralized our brain computer. If you can't read past a 5th grade level, Bay Area mom tells us all the time, being an educator working with young people, man, your ability to do serious counter-racist thinking and studying is going to be monumentally limited. And that's what you see. That's what you see amongst non-white people. Worldwide, I might submit, that's what you see. Let's see. Last 2 things I'll get in, and then we can wrap. The word conservative was used a lot in this section too. Like, man, and that's another one. Some of these are terms that Mr. Fuller has in the word guide for those very reasons. Like, that's one right there. Like, conservative, slow down. If you gotta use that term, you should stop. What do I mean when I say conservative, and in this context? Community, that shouldn't be used at all. Not if you're talking about black people. Come on. But on page 223, Dr. Beckles tells us, as one former bookstore member stated, the government, meaning white people, also certain forces within the black community, saw these information and cultural centers, meaning black bookstores, as a real threat. I wish we had got like an extra sentence. What forces within the black community saw black bookstores as a threat? Who are you talking, like black drug dealers? Who are you talking about exactly? And especially at this time period, who? It ain't no black BET at this time, so there is no black TV makers to speak of. Like, hey, you messing up our business, man. We want them glued to that screen all day long. Ain't no YouTube content creators or nothing like this at this time period that they'd be competing for. Who are the black forces that would be opposed to a black bookstore? The black church? Who? I'm guessing here. I'm guessing. I'm totally spitballing. I have no idea. The only one I could even seriously name would be maybe the black drug pushers, maybe. But they said they were allowed in the drugstore. I mean, in the bookstore. So I have no idea. You'd have to tell me if you all have any guesses. Please, I'm all ears. Anything else that I missed? He said, I believe he said, the black student movement, the decrease along with repression signaled the end of the black student movement in terms of funding, that funding decrease, which had been the chief supporter of black studies. It was militant Negro students, often academically marginal, who, in the words of black studies critic Martin Kilson, were accused of making trouble. I think one of our listeners mentioned this quote who wrote in, I'm mentioning it because there's a brand new documentary coming out about Madiba, Nelson Mandela, and I think it's called Troublemaker. I think I'm gonna have to be correct, but I think that was his nickname, Madiba, that he's stirring in the sense of stirring things up in order to change what I just said. And I know that because we read his memoir, autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom. But he said, in order to change things so that you have a culture where black people don't read and are not serious scholars, attempted counter-racists, to change that, you might have to be a troublemaker and stir things up and even maybe anger some of those so-called forces within the so-called black community who, hey, we like things just as they are. We don't want to be serious counter-racist scholars. We like watching TV and eating Cheetos and Snicker bars and name-calling black people. We like all that stuff. We don't want to change things at all. Lots will have to be changed to solve this problem. With that, we will get to they use the word eradication with Louis Michaux's bookstore. I thought that was important as well. Any hoodles, we will resume for next week. As I said, I cannot wait because Dr. Frances Cress Welsing is coming up next week. She's coming up repeatedly as the text continues, but coming up next week, getting into more the tactics of how white people repress these black bookstores so that we cannot be serious and solve this problem. Can't wait. If folks are kind of following along as we read, feel free, drop in a line, thoughts, observations as we continue reading. If you see parallels to what's happening right now, feel free to share that as well. We'll be here Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, review what's happening, what's transpired over the last week or so, conflict in the Middle East and all the rest of it. We'll give updates about broadcast for next week as well. Much obliged for folks tuning in live and archive. Hopefully worthy of your time and energy. Sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. We need high-functioning brain computers to solve the problem. We heard all that talk. Even some of the listeners raising an eyebrow like, dang, they invited the drug dealer. Yes, we got to have Detroit Red in the bookstore. Hopefully we can correct that too. But it would be better, sober, young people, brain computer, active, not damaged, so that we can read Malcolm X or Robert F. Williams and Mabel Williams' brand new memoir and all this great information. Hopefully get this here problem solved immediately. But the Bay Area mom told us about that too, doesn't she? All the young folks doing all the vape pens and the puff puff pass when they can't even read. Sobriety would be best. Creator, we ask, remind us, stop saying not all white people are racist. Even take that as an easy one. One of our listeners asked that question. Hey, the cool white people, the white allies, white people that's down with us, they could have went, I'm going to take some of the white power that we have stockpiled over all these years. I'm gonna break the bank. I'm not gonna go to the bar and get everybody around the Mad Dog. I'm gonna go to the Negro bookstore. Everybody get 5 books on me. And make sure you get 2 or 3 nonfiction ones too. Don't you come up here with all that pimping and iceberg and pimping. Get something serious, but 5 books on me. We're going to go ahead and get your little Negro library started. Say you little Negroes don't read. Well, I'm going to do my part. We didn't hear none of that. We didn't hear none of that. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying, hey, he did the study. I would think that would have been something to brag about, right? We had big-time white spenders came in here at least for a day or two, and they bought up all the Toni Morrison. They bought up all the Chancellor Williams. Nope. What does it mean to be white? It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cows signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed.
I'm a victim, brother.
Problem. You're a victim.
Man, I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.